He's hard of hearing, blind in one eye,
and shits his pants on the regular.
I work about 15 hours a day.
and
Will be to develop an overall strategy for America in this period when really a new world order can be created. It's a great opportunity. It isn't just a crisis. I will kill you. I will kill all of you. Destroy all happy people.
I don't fuck with you.
This location,
You little stupid ass bitch, I ain't fucking with you.
an extraordinary opportunity.
You little dumb ass bitch, I ain't fucking with you.
Big local societies.
I got a million trillion things I'd rather fucking do
If we act wisely,
than to be fucking with you. Little stupid ass, I don't give a fuck, I don't give a fuck, I don't give a fuck, bitch. I don't give a fuck about you or anything that you do. Don't give a fuck about you or anything that you do.
to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
Within the next 4 years, we will see the emergence of a new international order.
The beginning of a new international order, and it could well be that this president, who is so reviled by intellectuals, will emerge as one of the seminal presidents of his period.
Get your hands up against the wall and spread them. Opposition, I'll just take them. Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. Understand? I'm not fucking around with you. Try to resist, I'll dismiss you. Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you.
Basically, I'm the worst nightmare you ever had. Figure a trigger happy nigga with a badge, parading around Los Angeles. High off coke with a banana clip, feasting off the weak street evangelist with a manuscript and professional ass whipping. Task force, brass knuckles, a master in ass kicking. If you ask for it, I blast for it, you're back flipping. No one saw it, I won't stop, the clock's ticking. Got a rookie for a partner that's ready to fight niggas. The world's a merry-go-round, I stereotype niggas. He's a spit in the face of a pit bull and bite niggas. Matter of fact, kinda like this cat for a white nigga.
Get your hands up against the wall and spread them. Opposition, I'll just take them. Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you.
Henry Kissinger walks into a bar. It sounds like a joke. Henry Kissinger and a penguin walk into a bar. I'm not asking what you do, but what would it displease you if I walked over and punched Henry Kissinger in the face? Would you find that entertaining? Would you have a frisson of pleasure even? Would you feel that justice is in some small way served?
You hate Henry Kissinger.
I fucking hate him.
Yeah.
Because in my travels, I stumble across his good works everywhere I go.
Right. Let's do this.
A rabbit punch.
No kidney punch.
Yeah.
Cheers, guys. Oh, my.
Say we're done. You packed up your stuff. It's really over. Said you've had enough. There's one thing I'd like to say before you leave. Hey. Fuck you, bitch. You broke my heart. Fuck your friends, tearing us apart. Fuck your dog, hope he never comes home. Fuck you, bitch, hope you wind up alone.
Welcome to The Independent Review, a weekly podcast where we bring you the latest from the world of independent journalism. Whether you're a news junkie, a curious learner, or just looking for a fresh perspective away from the corporate media, this is the show for you. So join us now as we dive into the world of independent journalism on The Independent Review.
Welcome to another episode of the Independent Review, live on the AM Wake Up channel on Rockfin and Rumble. Today we have clips from Craig Pasta, Grand Theft World, and many more. Let's jump to our first clip with Derrick Broze and his update on the Fluoride trial.
Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network, and today is Wednesday, February 14th, 2024, and I am still in San Francisco, California, as the fluoride lawsuit, the second phase of the fluoride lawsuit, has come to an end just yesterday, and I'm headed home tomorrow. And in this video, I'm going to basically be breaking down the last 3 days of the fluoride lawsuit, the fluoride hearings these last 2 weeks. I did a previous video on my website, theconsciousresistance.com, and on all my social media, sharing everything that we learned in the first 7 days. 6 days, excuse me. And so we had a total of 9 days. The first week there was 3, and then a weekend, another 3. And now this was based on Friday, Monday, and Tuesday of this week. Things have come to an end, and I'll give you a very quick summary here in the beginning for those of you who are impatient and want to hear the bullet points right away. And then if you stay tuned for this whole video, I'll give you more of the details, the insights, the important things that I heard and saw and learned over the last 3 days. So right off the bat, the fluoride lawsuit is on a break basically right now. Both sides have rested their case. The EPA, the U.S. government, and the Fluoride Action Network, the plaintiffs, they rested their case last week. So both sides have presented all their witnesses, provided the judge, Chen, here in the federal court in California, with the data that they believe proves their case. In the case of the Fluoride Action Network, they're trying to prove that fluoride is a neurotoxicant and affects neurodevelopment in children, specifically prenatal and then even after birth. And the EPA is trying to prove that it's uncertain. So that's where we've been. And as I said, both sides rested their cases, but things are not completely over. Judge Chen asked for a week to go over all the data, all the information, and then get his questions together. And he's going to provide these questions to each side. And next Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific via Zoom, the final session will happen where both sides will get to present their closing arguments, and presumably the judge is going to ask these questions. And I will be reporting on that and live tweeting as well. That's next week. And then after that, the judge will take a break of days to weeks to maybe months to make this decision. We will find out some more details next week. But that's basically where things are now. So it's not totally over, but both sides have rested their cases. Witnesses were presented by the Fluoride Action Network, and witnesses were presented by the EPA. And so that's the short summary. And now let's get deeper into it. First off, though, I want to remind you guys to bookmark my website, theconsciousresistance.com. As you see, we have a new pop-up here, big, bold, beautiful, so you can't miss it. Subscribe to my email list, guys, if you're not already on our email list, especially if you don't follow me via social media. If you're just watching my videos on one of the video platforms I'm streaming on, then you're going to miss a lot of my content. So you want to make sure you're getting the email. Sign up there. And today's post, you can find it right here. Week 2 of the fluoride lawsuit concludes. And after this video, this will be updated with the video you're watching right now, and also some of the relevant links. What we're mainly going to cover, though, is going to be coming out of a new article that I just wrote for The Last American Vagabond. It's not even published yet, so you're seeing it and hearing about it first here. It'll be published this evening or tomorrow at the latest. And I titled it, Week 2 of the Fluoride Lawsuit, the EPA rests their case and admits harm related to fluoride exposure. I need to get rid of that comma there at the end. And so we're going to go over this. I'm going to give you guys some of the highlights. Like I said, some of the more detail. I already told you what happened as far as like the judge is going to review the evidence and where they're going to get back next week. But today I want to get into showing you some of the big points that came out during the EPA's witnesses, including Dr. David Savitz and then Dr. Stanley Barone. And I want to make it clear, first off, right off the bat, just in case anybody's curious, because you may have seen that I've been interviewing the Fluoride Action Network's expert witnesses, Dr. Philippe Grandjean, Dr. Bruce Lamphere, Dr. Howard Hu, and then I interviewed Brenda, who is one of the plaintiffs, and I interviewed Michael Connett, who's the lead attorney for the Fluoride Action Network. So I interviewed 5 folks on the side of the plaintiffs, and I did ask Dr. David Savitz if I could interview him. He acted very nervous and said that he would have to talk to the lawyers, And then once his testimony wrapped up, he pretty much just got out of the right away, and I didn't have a chance to ask him anything. Then I asked Dr. Stanley Barone, who was the final witness in person for the EPA, and he told me that he gave me his email and said that he would have to have it approved by the EPA's communication officers. And so I might still send him some questions. I don't have high expectations for that. And then I also did ask the attorneys representing the EPA, or the Department of Justice, the US government, basically, one of them at least, and he declined. Brandon Atkins is his name. He declined to do an interview as well. So just so you know, I did my journalistic due diligence and tried to interview both sides. Just want to make that clear. Fortunately, only one side was willing to do interviews, and that's the interviews that you've seen if you're following my work. But the rest of this, we're going to focus on some of the testimony that was provided by the EPA's witnesses. So Dr. David Savitz, he's a professor of epidemiology at the Brown University School of Public Health. He served as an editor of the journal, American Journal of Epidemiology, and epidemiology itself, and as a member of the Epidemiology and Disease Control Study section of the National Institutes of Health, or the NIH. So some of the testimony, as I outlined here, had to do with, like, the discussion, the debate between each side had to do with at what level water fluoridation begins to cause neurodevelopmental issues, because nobody has at the moment been able to narrow that down. And the government, which is actually a step forward, the US EPA and their attorneys representing them, were willing, and there were witnesses, were willing to acknowledge that fluoride does cause harm, neurodevelopmental harm. But the thing is, they're saying that it's only at levels above 2 milligrams per liter of fluoridated water, not at or anywhere near the 0.7 milligrams per liter recommended by the CDC. So it's kind of even a step forward that the government is willing to acknowledge that, yes, okay, fluoride is clearly causing harm, and I'm going to show you some of these statements from their witnesses. But at the same time, they're just only saying it's at these extremely high levels, and so it's not relevant, and that basically saying that the closer you get to 1.5 or anywhere closer to 1 milligram, anywhere that's close to 0.7, basically, that it's less clear. And they're basically saying that there should be more studies, including Dr. Savitz. He said he would place emphasis on the 1 to 2 milligram per liter whenever he was asked by Judge Chin, like, if he could describe specifically where does he think the harm is at. And he said that there should be more studies. So that's what the government's position is basically doing, is trying to play this like, oh, we still don't really know, even though there's plenty of data and evidence and has been for years about fluoride's harms. They're basically just trying to say that we still don't know. We need to continue doing these studies before we go any further. So a lot of the discussion, as I said, was around that. And Judge Chen was asking Dr. Savitz about the NTP's program, the U.S. National Toxicology Program, which is basically the part of the U.S. government that tried to produce this report, tried to publish this report in May 2022, which found that there is an association between fluoride exposure and lower IQ in children. And as we now know through the emails that have come out through this lawsuit and through my reporting, that the CDC and members of the HHS have helped block the release of this study, and so we only have a draft version of it. Nevertheless, the judge was asking about this, and he was asking about the NTP's conclusions regarding fluoride's impacts above 1.5 milligrams per liter. And Dr. Savitz said, quote, "There appears that there is this association of higher fluoride exposure and lower IQ across the studies." He also said he was critical of some of the conclusions drawn by the NTP researchers, but he was careful not to disparage themselves. So it was interesting the way that the scientists for the EPA essentially are. It's like they're trying their best to not necessarily attack directly the work of other scientists, but at the same time discredit it enough and paint enough doubt in the mind of the judge, so that he doesn't feel confident to draw a conclusion. That seems to be their whole strategy. It's uncertain. There's no clarity, and so you shouldn't make a ruling. Meanwhile, Michael Conant and the Fluoride Action Network have argued, and I think quite successfully, that there are other examples that they pointed to where the EPA themselves chose to act even whenever they couldn't, when they couldn't clearly define where the harm started, for example, with lead, which now we know there's no safe level of lead. and I think it's the same for fluoride. I think that's what the data is showing. But the EPA has acted when they in the past when they couldn't clearly define where the harm started, as is the case currently with water fluoridation, and that in the past the EPA has acted even whenever the harm was way below the levels that are believed to be safe, because as Michael Connett talked about plenty of times in this lawsuit and these hearings, there is this uncertainty factor that the EPA usually uses. They use an uncertainty factor of 10. So when they identify where the potential harm is, you're supposed to multiply that by 10 to get this uncertainty factor. And essentially the idea, at least as I understood it, is that you're trying to look out for the most vulnerable populations, people who might have pre-existing conditions and comorbidities and things that make them more susceptible to something like a toxin like fluoride. And so you're not just thinking of the most healthy individual, you're thinking of the those most vulnerable people. So that was also a big part of this discussion throughout the last couple of days. So I want to go forward here because I want you guys to read this when it actually comes out. So I'm not gonna share the whole thing with you. But there were some other key points. What I'm showing here is that during Dr. Savage's testimony, which I think the EPA believed he was one of their strongest witnesses, and he does have credentials, and he was involved with the review of the NTP report as a member of the National Academy of Sciences Institute of Medicine, NASM. He was one of the reviewers who reviewed this NTP report, and in fact, it was already kind of unusual for NASM to review the NTP report. This is not something that's taken place before. It was the first time that the organization has been tasked with doing multiple reviews on an NTP report. So we already knew there was some kind of something going on. And during questioning of Dr. Savitz, the EPA read him the NASM statement on the NTP conclusion. So this is what the National Academy of Sciences Institute of Medicine, excuse me, I wrote that wrong. National Academy of Sciences and Environmental Medicine, I believe is what that's called. That this is what NASM said about the NTP report. They said, quote, "The monograph falls short of providing a clear and convincing argument that supports its assessment." Essentially, NASM, with Savitz's participation, did not endorse the conclusions of the NTP regarding an association between fluoride exposure and lower IQ. So again, trying to restate to the judge and show the judge, look, Dr. Savitz is an expert. He was on the NASM, the group of NASM reviewers who looked at the NTP report, and they said that we shouldn't be, they don't endorse this conclusion of the NTP that fluoride is associated with lower IQ in children. They wrote even further in this review with Dr. Savitz's participation that the NTP report, quote, "cannot be used to draw conclusions regarding low fluoride exposure concentrations, including those typically associated with drinking water fluoridation." Savitz said that he agreed with this conclusion. So again, this is like the EPA laying their case, laying the foundation. And then here comes Michael Connett with the Fluoride Action Network for his cross-examination. And he is, I think, quite a brilliant attorney and did a great job. His job was to show that Savitz is not actually an expert, and wasn't an expert on neurotoxicity of fluoride while he was reviewing the NTP report. So Michael Connett spent quite a bit of time trying to show various potential conflicts of interest, as well as making it clear that, and getting Savitz to admit in his own words, that he was a, quote, newcomer to the topic of water fluoridation and neurotoxicity, and using his own deposition testimony that he had previously stated under oath many times to impeach him and to just impeach his testimony, including one of the things Michael Connett pointed to was a $17 million grant which Savitz received from the National Institute of Dental and Craniofacial Research, which is a group that is very vocal and their support for water fluoridation. And it wasn't just Savitz, of course, himself, who was part of a team, but nevertheless, his work over the years has benefited from this institution, this organization that is a heavy proponent of water fluoridation. And that is often how these things work. You're receiving money to do the kind of work that you want, and at some point these people are going to need your help, and they might need you to push the certain opinion that they find, or at least don't draw strong conclusions, or just come in and muddy the waters, which is what it seemed like he was doing. Michael Connett also asked Dr. Savitz about a recent study. This is a newer study which found an association between fluoride and executive function for girls. And the term executive function relates to cognitive abilities. And when Michael Connett asked if the study found a, quote, statistically significant association between fluoride exposure and the impact on executive function, Savitz offered a qualified yes. He it's like, again, he wasn't being an easy witness, which is he's doing a good job. Just sort of not answering questions directly, and just being very slow in his answers and resistant to get to the conclusion that the person wants him to get to. Well, Michael Connett went and read directly from this study, which, by the way, you can see right here. It's linked in my article. I'll open it up for you real quick. This is recently published. Fluoride exposure during pregnancy from a community water supply is associated with executive function in preschool children, a prospective ecological cohort study. The study reads, quote, maternal exposure to drinking water throughout pregnancy fluoridated at the level of 0.7 milligrams per liter, which is the current amount recommended by the CDC, was associated with poor inhibitory control and cognitive flexibility, particularly in girls, suggesting a possible need to reduce maternal fluoride exposure during pregnancy. Pretty strong words there, and that's a new study, and that was brought into this. So the second part of this, or the second witness that the EPA called, was Dr. Stanley Barone, who also was a witness called by the Fluoride Action Network. They both used his testimony in different ways. Obviously, the Fluoride Action Network was trying to elicit testimony from him that made their case, and the EPA was doing the same. Dr. Stanley Barone is a senior science policy advisor with the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention in the EPA. He was involved in the first 10 risk assessments conducted by the EPA under TSCA, the Toxic Substance Control Act. And when he was asked his expert opinion on the association between water fluoride levels and lower IQ, Barone said there was, quote, a lot of uncertainty related to the epidemiological data and, quote, a lot of uncertainty for the NTP report. However, when he was under cross-examination by Michael Connett, Dr. Barone said yes when asked if he agreed that fluoride had been found to be a neurotoxin at certain levels. When he was questioned about the specific levels of fluoride in the water, the currently allowable levels, Barone was less willing to affirm this conclusion. Michael Connett said to him, quote, you agree that there is an association of neurotoxicity with water fluoridation above levels of 2 milligrams per liter. And he said, at some level above 2, yes. And this is where much of the debate remains. Both sides acknowledge that there is harm related to fluoride exposure, but they can't agree on at which concentration level potential harm begins, where the Fluoride Action Network is essentially saying maybe it doesn't even fully matter. We can prove that there is harm, a neurotoxic harm. There is harm in all these other ways, thyroids, issues they've been talking about. ADHD is a potential concern. It should just be banned is kind of the point. And I'm not somebody who's very much for government coming in and banning things and policing people in the nanny state and this sort of thing, but this isn't that case. This is your tax dollars being used on a local level to go pay to putting this known toxin into your water supply, and it's being added for some alleged medical benefits, which are, I think, not at all as strong as proposed, and maybe even totally negligible and non-existent. But the point is, your money is going to putting this poison if you live in the United States. And now Canada, as I'm going to talk about in just a moment, Canada is considering doing this. Recently, there was an announcement in the UK that they're going to start fluoridating their water. This is why this lawsuit is so important, and getting this information out is so important, because they are still spreading this poison and trying to convince people that it's safe. And nothing could be further from the truth. So, okay, so this is a really powerful moment, and I want to pull up my Twitter real quick for you guys, just to show you this picture of Dr. Stanley Barone, why I tell you about this. Because this happened yesterday, actually, almost at the end of the final questions for Dr. Barone. Again, Dr. Stanley Barone, risk assessment scientist working with the EPA, and being questioned by the Fluoride Action Network and being questioned by the EPA. This is him right here. And as they put, key moment in fluoride trial, EPA expert stunned by fluoride kidney question. That's him right there. And I want to share with you what happened. So as I wrote here, a particularly powerful moment came when Connett began questioning Barone about the kidney's ability to excrete toxins like fluoride. Connett made the point that individuals suffering from kidney issues may have a more difficult time excreting fluoride, which leads to increased buildup in the body. And he said, quote, you testified earlier today that there may be oversaturation going on in the kidney at the 95th percentile level in the fluoridated areas. Do you feel comfortable as a risk assessor exposing pregnant women to a level of fluoride that is so high that the kidney is oversaturated? And at this point, Barone literally froze. He just sat silently on the stand processing this question from Michael Connett. And this, to kind of paint a deeper picture, let me show you the tweet because they kind of give a little bit more of a play-by-play where I was just summarizing there. He asked him this question, and Barone, he's totally silent for a good while. At one point, the judge kind of intervened, and because the EPA objected, the judge let him continue the line of questioning, and basically he just stood there frozen for a minute, and then eventually, like, he mumbled something to the effect that he just didn't really answer, and at the end he said, his personal comfort level is not germane to the matter, which basically means like it's not relevant. He's trying to say it doesn't really matter what I think. It's like you're only being brought on the stand as an expert witness that deals with risk assessment, and Michael Connett asks you if you're comfortable as a risk assessor exposing pregnant women to a level of fluoride that is so high that the kidney might become saturated, and he's saying his opinion doesn't matter. It was just a very powerful moment, and I'm hoping, because there's apparently this program in the courts called Cameras in Courtrooms or something along those lines, where some of the cases, they are posting recordings from within the courtroom, and this fluoride case is supposed to be one of them. So I'm hoping we're going to get video from the last week here or so, and if they do, I will be finding that clip and I will be cutting it out and sharing it with you guys, so you can literally see, I think, at least 5 to 7 seconds passed, literally silence in the courtroom as Stanley Barone is just sitting on the stand, just pretty much frozen and not certain of what to say and how to, what to do. He's just thinking it over, and it was silent in the courtroom. It was a pretty epic moment. It was honestly beautiful. So it was good to see a government scientist, somebody who maybe is not being completely honest, literally put on the stand and questioned about this information. So last little section I want to share here is about this late-breaking study by Health Canada. For those who don't know, Health Canada is the federal public health agency for Canada. And they actually commissioned a study, a review of all the evidence on the potential human health effects of fluoride. And this was actually conducted by Risk Sciences International with a contract with Health Canada. And this is because, as I mentioned a moment ago, Health Canada is actually currently developing their water fluoridation policy, as they plan to start recommending fluoridating more of Canada's water, which is not, most of Canada is not fluoridated at the moment. There are some places, but they want to change that and increase that and turn it into the United States. So while Risk Sciences International was commissioned by Health Canada, the agency, Health Canada, they chose not to publish the results of this review, this study. Instead, Health Canada organized their own, what's called an expert panel meeting on the health effects of fluoride in drinking water in June 2023 to release their own interpretation of the conclusions of the RSI study. So again, Health Canada, government agency in Canada, they work with this company RSI, say, hey, do a review of all the data on fluoride and how it relates to health effects with humans and drinking water. They don't publish that. Instead, they get an expert panel to review that data and then draw their own conclusions. And one of these people who was on the panel was Dr. David Savitz, the guy we've just been talking about a moment ago, who again has received millions of dollars from people who are, or has received funding from people who are heavy water fluoridation promoters. And as I wrote here, the differences in the conclusions of the published RSI report and the Health Canada expert panel are stark. The RSI report concluded, and this is, I didn't link it here. Let me find it, see if I have it real quick. I don't have it in front of me, but I want to get it. Okay, here, let's go back to my Twitter real quick. I want to share this. I want you guys to actually see this. We'll actually read it from this study so you can see that it's not just my own words. And here's, as I tweeted earlier today, here, we'll read it right here. This study was published just last week during the fluoride lawsuit. It was discussed during testimony. And they say here, the available evidence demonstrated a moderate to strong magnitude of association between fluoride and neurocognitive effects, with consistent evidence across studies for the impact on childhood IQ at fluoride exposures relevant to current North American drinking water levels, which is a pretty scary statement. They're saying directly this is relevant. This isn't just like, because again, a lot of the fluoride lawsuit is dealt with like, at what levels is it harmful? Well, this new study that was literally published just on the 6th of this month, just a week ago, is saying that at levels relevant to North American drinking water levels, there's, were finding cognitive issues. And so that was the conclusion of the actual, this is the study here. This is being published by, if you go ahead and you search here, Risk Sciences, right there, you'll actually see this manuscript is based on a report prepared by Risk Sciences International under a contract with Health Canada to review current evidence on potential human health effects of fluoride, right? So there you go. That's what I was saying. So Health Canada didn't publish it, but the researchers decided to publish it themselves. And instead, Health Canada, they published this other document, this expert panel that has Dr. David Savitz. Here it is. It was June 2023. Dr. David Savitz, and the report from the expert panel says, quote, there is not a sufficient basis at this time to recommend a specific point of departure and health-based value for neurocognitive effects. So clearly some pretty big differences in the conclusion. One clearly saying fluoride exposure reduces IQ levels in children. Very clear. And then even more clear, at concentrations close to those seen in North American drinking water level. The other one says not sufficient evidence basis at this time to recommend, a point of departure, basically saying they can't find evidence for neurocognitive effects. And during his cross-examination, Michael Conant actually asked Dr. Savitz, Dr. Savitz about his work on this expert panel for the Health Canada study, and if he knew that several members of this panel are water fluoridation advocates, water fluoridation promoters. And Michael Conant specifically mentioned a Dr. Stephen Levy, who has a background in dentistry and is a well-known champion of fluoride. Dr. Savitz claimed to be unaware of whether the individual panel members had advocated for or against fluoride. But I want to just show you, let me see if we can, here we go. Here's the expert panel members. Dr. Stephen Levy, University of Iowa, Department of Preventative and Community Dentistry, College of Dentistry, Department of Epidemiology, College of Public Health, and here's Dr. David Savitz right there. And Michael Conant pointed out a few others. And then, I want to mention here, you've got somebody from the World Health Organization, right? But we also have to remember, as I was told by Dr. Philippe Grandjean last week during the first week of the trial, that he said the World Health Organization had been infiltrated by the fluoride lobby, that back in years ago when he was tasked with helping develop a document for them about fluoride, it was basically made clear that they didn't want his data, and that they wanted to claim that fluoride's harms only came at immense levels, and he had issues with that, and so he left. He also mentioned Harvard University and said that people at Harvard had threatened him because of his work studying fluoride as well while he was at Harvard. So how much can we really trust this expert panel is the kind of the point I'm getting here. And that's what Michael Conant was doing, was showing the judge this panel that Health Canada gathered together to basically try to put doubt into the minds of the readers about the study they commissioned themselves is filled with people who have conflicts of interest. And the final thing I'll mention is that there is going to be a third witness, but it's a pre-recorded video that the judge is going to watch in his own time. It's Dr. Jesus Ibarluezia, and he was involved in a study in Spain, looking at the Basque region of Spain. And this study controversially found that fluoride exposure can apparently increase IQ for boys, is what is claimed, which was totally at odds with everything else we've heard. And even the Judge Shen, was also uncertain about this. He was asking Dr. Savitz about how these conclusions could be reached. He said, quote, does this not raise some question about whether there is something wrong with this study? He said, you got this result that seems totally counterintuitive and not consistent with the other literature. And Dr. Savitz said, absolutely, it raises the question. So even Dr. Savitz had to admit this study from this other alleged doctor, which was also recently published, and I think behind the scenes was probably some people wanted this study to be published so that the government had something to point to and say, hey, look, new data shows the total opposite. Fluoride's actually increasing IQ, which is just ridiculous. But those are the highlights there, guys. As I said earlier, the judge now will review the case for the next week, and next Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific, it will be back on Zoom, where the judge will ask some questions, the EPA will make their closing statements, closing arguments, and the Fluoride Action Network will as well. And I will be listening. I will be live tweeting, and then I will write another article for The Last American Vagabond in addition to the one that I just shared with you, which should be published later today. And so you will have an article for week 1, week 2, and then for the final day of this second phase of the fluoride lawsuit. And in fact, if you go to the LastAmericanVagabond.com, you look over here on TLAV team, you find my name, Derrick Broze. You can see a list of all my different investigations, and there's been a lot of them. But if you go to the bottom right here, you'll see the fluoride trial, and you can click that. And that opens up every single article that I've done on the fluoride trial. And also, similarly, on the ConsciousResistance.com, if you scroll down to our categories here, you can see all the different categories for some of the topics I've covered over the years. You click on water fluoridation, and it'll show you every single video, every report I've done on water fluoridation. I actually checked this recently. I think my oldest one on here is 2014 or 2015. So you can see I've been talking about this topic for a number of years and following the fluoride trial, the fluoride lawsuit since the beginning. And you can also expect to see me guys this coming week on several different podcasts, some which are very big, which I won't say yet. But if you know anybody else who needs to hear about this issue, please do reach out to them, tell them to reach out to me, tell them to check out the ConsciousResistance.com so they can get caught up on all the work I've been doing. And of course, tell them to check out The Last American Vagabond as we continue to try to bring awareness to this fact, because this particular lawsuit is hyper focused on fluoride as a neurotoxin, and that is an important thing. Obviously, we're talking about neurodevelopment, and how we're going to how we're going to be able to function in society. If you're losing IQ points, if you're losing cognitive ability, executive function, that's going to cause some problems in our society. But that's only one of the various harms that have been found in a number of studies for the last 70, 80, 90 years now in different parts of the world where fluoride has been studied. It's actually one of the most studied compounds in the world, and we have so much data about it showing that, as I talked about last week, that it stores in the bones, and then in the pregnant mothers who are drinking fluoride, the babies are going to pull out that calcium and try to pull out the calcium from the mom's bones to make their own bones, but they're also going to be taking in fluoride directly through the placenta, through the blood-brain barrier, and this is going to cause all kinds of harms. There's thyroid issues, there's bone problems, there's liver and kidney issues, there's the pineal gland, calcification. There's so many things going on with this compound that it needs to be out of the water as soon as possible. And I encourage everybody who is a hoping or a praying person to hope and pray that Judge Chen, after the next week and hearing the final statements from both sides, does what we all know needs to take place, which is to ban fluoride from being put in the water, because it's a poison, and it has been a poison for way too long now. So
next, we have this short clip from Catherine Austin Fitts on CBDCs.
I think it's important to understand that CBDCs, not only can you implement negative interest rates, but you can also implement taxation without representation.
Yes.
I mean, you can do it with inflation, you can do it with interest rates, or you can do it with...
But negative interest rates is some sort of taxation on your savings account. Now,
Right.
and what I think is the terrible part of the discussion is that governments right now are saying, wait a minute, we're simply building CBDC. And you could see CBDC, it could be something beautiful because you have an account with the central bank. So if you're afraid that your local bank might go bankrupt, like Lehman Brothers, Fortis, etc., maybe you're afraid, well, there's an alternative. You can have an account with the central bank directly. Isn't it fantastic? Well, for a number of reasons, that sort of thinking is very problematic.
Right.
First of all, let's say that I'm a baker and I'm 60 years old, I'm not, and I've worked for, let's say, 40 years, and I have 200,000 in a savings account,
right?
Which is very realistic. 200, 300,000.
Right.
You don't want to do risky investments. I know people who are in the situation.
Right.
Let's say that, and one of them recently asked me, they said, well, if there would be CBDC, I would love it. Because then I could transfer that 300,000 euro in my savings account to the central bank digital currency account at the central bank, and it would be safe there.
See, what I hear, when you say that to me, I hear, oh, I'm going to take all my savings and put it with somebody who's worse than the Russian mafia.
But even then, let's say that you can trust the Russian mafia. The problem is, if you would do that, and you would have an app on your phone
Right.
But you also, as a customer, a CBDC customer, you need to be onboarded, as they call it. You need to identify yourself. Thank you. The easiest way for that to be achieved, which is something that's also openly discussed, is to have a CBDC app within your existing banking app on your phone.
Right.
And then, first of all, then the extra benefit for you as a customer isn't clear at all. There's totally no extra benefit because you can already make electronic payments besides using cash. But the thing is that if you would have the opportunity, you as a person, or me as a person, or this baker that I mentioned, to transfer a few €100,000 from the bank to the central bank, and a few 100 million Europeans would do that, or Americans, for the sake of argument, the banking system would collapse.
Right.
You can't handle a deposit outflow
Right.
because it would be a traditional bank run with banknotes,
Right.
but now at the speed of light, thanks to digital innovation.
Right.
Facilitated by a central bank that has spent the last 10 years saving banks by injecting €8 billion, 8 trillion euro, if you think about it. It's a tremendous amount of money in the European Union. That's the size of the balance sheet total of the European Central Bank.
So you've bubbled, you've created this huge bubble, and now you're going to collapse it.
And then you're going to say, well, okay, after saving these banks, I'm going to build you an alternative for free. That's very unrealistic.
So what I hear is, ooh, opportunity. I'm going to crash the economy, and I'm going to be able to pick everything up cheap.
No, but it's worse than that.
Yeah,
what's happening is that, or at least what's being discussed openly in Europe, and it is Mr. Panetta. He is Mr. CBDC within the central bank, the European Central Bank. What he says, well, we should prevent that from happening. So this particular baker that says, well, I think that the idea of a CBDC under these circumstances is appealing. If I have complete freedom, no programmability, no negative interest rates, etc. But all like an onion, all these nice things are being peeled off until there's only ugliness. And one of the features is being able to have a large amount of savings with the central bank. Central bank says we won't do that. And there are two options. One of them is have an algorithm within your app. Now it gets ugly, which prohibits you from doing this.
Oh.
And the reason is that otherwise, and they call it disintermediation. They say, well, we want to prevent disintermediation of the financial system, the existing banks. Oh, but wait a minute. I thought you were going to create a safe alternative from them. And within the same breath, you say that you are going to prevent people from using it to the extent that they want. So your CBDC account in the first years, you will only be able to put 5,000 or 7,000 euro there.
Yeah.
This next clip is from Pasta and his update on Maui.
Let's talk about Hawaii. Hawaii is not being talked about for quite some time. There's a lot of stuff going on in Hawaii, and we said this 100 days after the fire. We went out to Hawaii. That was the second time we were out there, me and the camera guy. The first time was 30 days after the fire. But 100 days after the fire was very interesting because the number one issue, we could see this coming down the pipeline. And when we got there, it was very true that housing is your number one issue out there. You know, there's still a lot of people who are, talking about the disaster itself and the fact that there's no transparency on the fire, and there was no transparency right now with everything going on. Even the governor and the mayor touting that local businesses would be the majority of the subcontractors used for the cleanup and the restoration. And right now, the Army Corps of Engineers has contracted out another company from the mainland that's based out of San Francisco, and they're refusing to show their books. So they've spotted a couple subcontractors out there doing some work with some trucks and whatnot, but they don't know across the board who is actually getting those contracts. Now, that's something for a different day. Housing, right? Housing is another problem. This is just crazy. Listen to my boy Alfie. He was in the first movie, Lahaina on Fire. Take a listen. Check it out right over here. Jamie? You got it? All right, here we go. Go full screen.
Anyone who's being asked to vacate their rental. These are Maui residents who were not affected by the fire, didn't lose their home, but are now being asked to vacate their rental so that the landlord can rent it out to a fire survivor, thereby making a ton more money. the agencies that are paying for these services will not work with those landlords. Okay? And if you do suspect this is happening to you or someone you know, you have some resources to utilize. There's three main agencies that are paying for fire survivors to live. That's FEMA, CNHA, and GEM. Okay, if you suspect this is happening, you can reach out to CNHA at Kako'o Maui at hawaiiancouncil.org. That's Kako'o Maui at hawaiiancouncil.org. This will be in the description down below. And you can reach out to a GEM when the contact there is Danielle at globalempowermentmission.org. Danielle at globalmissionempowerment.org. And then for FEMA, they do not have a direct email to reach out to, but if you know anyone on the Maui long-term recovery group committees, you can reach out to anyone there, and then they'll reach out to FEMA for you. If you don't know anyone on the long-term recovery group, you can reach out to me, and then I can help you. If you have any complaints regarding rentals in this same sort of vein, you can reach out to the Hawaii Attorney General's office. That's Hawaii AG at hawaii.gov. That's Hawaii AG at hawaii.gov. Please share this message with anyone that you think might benefit from it. We don't want to see good Maui families having to move off island just to move in a fire survivor. That's not helping. That's actually creating another problem, and we want to avoid that. All right.
So that's exactly what he said. It is creating another problem there, right? This whole situation in Maui, and you knew the greed would come into play, right? The landlords are going to be there at the end of the day, and they're going to be with some of the greediest, right? So they're getting extra money for their rentals if they can move somebody out and move a fire survivor in there, because the state is now going to guarantee their rent at a higher rate. You know, this is not just we're not talking about the small the small term rentals. We're talking about long term rentals. They're actually kicking people out of their housing and moving these other people in. So they're just creating a whole nother problem, you know, as we speak. It's just allowing the landlord who has a long-term rental to throw somebody out and get a fire survivor in there and get a lot more money. And it's just crazy that they're doing this. And they're trying to report this and keep this under control. But, you know, once again, there's going to be debates and arguments there. Oh, this guy wasn't paying his rent all the time. It's been late. Look how many times he's got marked up. He's making noise at night. You know, it's just out of control. I have every right to throw him out. So it's going to be an interesting battle over there, but that's the new problem that's going on right now in Maui. Every time we open our eyes, there's something new that's going on there, and there's no transparency across the board. That is the issue. Take a look at this other video I put up from Alfie. Alfie was in the first video, Lahaina on Fire. Housing is the problem, ladies and gentlemen. So we have to talk about this and keep reporting on it. Take a look at this next video.
A month to $100 a month to now paying $9,300 a month for a 4-bedroom. That's what's happening out here. Prior to the fire, my family and I were a family of 7. We have 5 kids, and then myself and my wife, and we were renting a 4-bedroom in Lahaina, right across the street from the ocean, right on Front Street, and it was $4,500. Now, after the fire, of course, we lost a bunch of homes. Housing is really scarce. When supply goes down, demand goes up along with prices, which brings us to our current state of things, which is $9,300 a month. So we left the hotel in October because we wanted so badly to have a home so we can start rebuilding and start healing. So we decided to leave the hotels because we found a house to rent. Unfortunately, that house was $9,300. It was actually $9,500, and then we negotiated to $9,375. Just to be completely accurate, we paid $9,375 for a 4-bedroom in Kaanapali. It's a beautiful house. It's wonderful, but of course we can't afford $9,300. We lost all of our businesses in the fire. All of our forms of income were lost. Now, in October, the FEMA programs, they have significantly gone up in the amount of assistance that they're able to give to a fire survivor. So we left early, and at the time we were in the rental assistance program. That's all they had at the time, right, for helping people with housing. And that rental assistance program issued, or we qualified for like $2,500 a month, and we were responsible to figure out the rest. And it was really difficult. And I'll tell you how we did it, right? Every family's gonna have a different story. We did it by, we had insurance on a boat that came in. And of course, I wouldn't have wanted to use all the insurance on a rental, but we had to, right? This is what you got to do. I had someone who owed me a pretty good chunk of money, and he sold his house and finally was able to pay me, which was really, really fortunate. All that went to rent. Now this is the message that I need to share, and you got to pay attention here, and you got to share it with others so this doesn't happen to you. I have been working every single job and figuring out every single financial assistance that we qualify for to make up that rent. Okay. And so Catholic Charities was issuing fire survivor families up to $4,500 for a one-time shot. That's all you can qualify for. That's all they were given. So we took it. We just it was such a stress reliever to be like, oh my gosh, this is great. All we got to do is come up with half the rent this month. Great. And so with the FEMA rental assistance program, the way it works is you have to send in a bunch of paperwork to show that you qualify. You continually to qualify. If you found a job, you got to report that. If for some reason you got to report that. But what I didn't know is if you accept assistance from another organization, it will disqualify you from the FEMA rental assistance program. And that's what happened to us. We got kicked out of the FEMA rental assistance program. And I'm so grateful for what FEMA has done. I don't hate on FEMA, even though this might sound like I don't. They're helping a ton of families, and it's been great. But I wouldn't have taken any other assistance. I just thought of one time, I did not know. Maybe that's my fault for not knowing, for not looking into it. But how else are we going to make $9,300 a month? We got to be creative, and we got to.
So, I mean, this just leads to the bigger problem. I know Alfie's being really nice over here, and he's been really, happy that FEMA's been around, and some of the distribution centers at Ellie Cochran's distribution center that he was a big part of help setting up. FEMA actually had a table over there and was actually being able to cut some of the fat and helping some people out. Same thing with the Red Cross. He was able to discover areas where you can go get direct money and cash from Red Cross or help from FEMA. However, the overall job that FEMA and Red Cross have done has been the pits, right? So Alfie's being very politically correct over here and, nice, because that's the type of guy he is. But the fact is that a lot of people don't understand or know these programs properly. And, there's somebody who's just making a decision over there who are deciding to say, hey, you took money from somewhere else. You can't get FEMA money. That's a tragedy. That is sad. The Lahaina housing situation is really bad, ladies and gentlemen. They're jacking up rents. They're throwing other people out to get fire survivors in because they can get guaranteed money from the state at a higher rate. This is just begun, this problem. We're only in the second inning in Lahaina, and we're going to continue to report on it.
Next is this clip from Grand Theft World with Richard Grove and Tony Myers.
All right, so excellent presentation by Chris Hedges. You may not agree with everything he has to say, and that's fine. I don't agree with everything he said. There was some stuff at the beginning where it's so easy for everyone to become Nazis. I'm like, not so much. Not so much. For certain people, if you don't know how to think, can you get propagandized into being a Nazi? Yes. And does Prussian schooling make a whole lot of people who can't think? Yes. So I could agree with him as that applies, but if you have a conscience about you and you can imagine other people suffering and you imagine the consequences of your actions before you take actions, I'm just talking mature adult stuff, responsible, self-reliant type people. They do this. We do this. It's not so easy. So yeah, I would disagree with stuff like that. On the other hand, a lot of facts in there that are unfortunately true, even though they are contra-narrative. What did you think, Tony?
Yeah, I mean, much agreed. He recited many of the facts that were presented, like the ICJ, and many of the facts that we have covered as they were being made, available to us in the public. So he's, again, I think it's what reinforces it, sort of like constantly hearing the numbers, the devastate. Like at this point, I mean, we're how many? It's November, December, January. So we're like 3 months, a little over 3 months into the conflict, and this level of devastation, it's hard to put it in perspective. I think it's good to be reminded of that perspective in the magnitude and many orders of magnitude greater this is than any other sort of armed conflict of this nature in the 21st century.
It's the most obvious. I mean,
And
he
it's the
said live
most
stream
obvious.
genocide, and I was
Yeah,
like,
that's
that
exactly
should be this week's title, but it'll be next week's title because now you guys know what it means. That'll make it easier.
It almost in a weird parallel or sort of as an analogy, similar to probably what people went through during the 1960s and the early 70s, late 60s and 70s with Vietnam. First time we sort of got televised pictures and commentary about, the realities of sort of war on the ground. And that actually had a major backlash, obviously. So, it draws parallels in the sense that like people are getting to see, yes, this live stream genocide, and are also asking a lot of questions about all aspects of Judaism. That is under a microscope in Zionism, obviously, as an emergent property of Judaism. So
I got the
very
title for
interesting.
tonight wrong. It was supposed to be Controversy of Zionists, but my bad. All right, so I mentioned, this is going to tie into the news. I mentioned that yesterday we did this presentation on the underground history of America. I want to take you to slide 115 real quick because it does apply. Oh, wait, that's the wrong button. Here, there's the right button. That is the 500 shekel note.
I got
on
that.
On the face of that, Edmund de Rothschild. He's the first kibbutzer. He's setting up the colonization. Like I could go full screen, but I have to go to this other slide for you. So that is one artifact. And then I also wanted to mention, just for the sake of the record, Rothschild and early Jewish colonization started in 1882 with Edmund de Rothschild, who's on the shekel. That's how you get to be on the shekel. You got to help him colonize about 60 years before Hitler. And so that's from Hebrew University. Rand Ariston's a professor in Israel, so it's not anti-Semitic. I want you to know you can check that out and not feel like you're anti-Semitic for reading facts in history that save people. You could also check out The Two Rothschilds in the Land of Israel by Simon Schama, printed by Alfred Knopf and Company, 1978. That's Edmund de Rothschild. And the other one is the Lord Rothschild, to whom the Balfour Declaration was addressed. And speaking of which, if we go forward to slide, was it 150? We're going to go down a couple more slides. You guys are getting a quick version of this. If I go down to slide 150, when I was reading this yesterday, we're getting into the Balfour Declaration and origins of the First World War, right? This was the second section of the presentation. There on the Rothschild archives.
Lord Milner's Second War.
Dude, yeah. I'm going to, let me see if I can, send this
That's
into
a great way to
slideshow
set that one up.
from current slides so people can see it. All right, so this is in the Rothschild archive, and it's Lord Rothschild, Walter Rothschild. So this is the other Rothschild and the two Rothschilds in the land of Israel, state of Israel. It's Edmund de Rothschild and Walter Rothschild. If you were to read this article, which I'm sure I did when I made the original graphic because I put the red boxes around it, but yesterday I read it out loud, I guess, for the first time. So I read it internally, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a juicy piece. I got to make sure I put that in a presentation. Here's what it reads. Origins of the First World War. This is on the Rothschild International Banking Dynasty Family official Rothschild archive site. This is not my opinion. This is not me taking something out of context. This is me searching for the fact of what are the origins of the First World War. And they are kind enough to have an entry. It's not even in the timeline. It's a specific article in the collection, okay? Because the Balfour Declaration apparently is a big deal. And it reads as follows. This is me quoting RothschildArchive.org. Quote, beginning in 1916, the British hoped that in exchange for their support of Zionism, quote, the Jews, end quote, would help to finance the growing expenses of the First World War, which was becoming increasingly burdensome. More importantly, policymakers in the Foreign Office believed that Jews could be prevailed upon to persuade the United States to join the war. At this same time, there were very strong pro-Zionist feelings by many of the political elite and establishment. Many of Britain's leaders, including Prime Minister David Lloyd George and Balfour himself, felt for the Jews and their history. These men were deeply religious, Christian, Zionists. They had grown up on the Bible. The Holy Land was their spiritual home. They believed that modern Zionism would fulfill a divine promise and resettle the Jews in the land of their ancient fathers. Now
juxtapose that to Benjamin Friedman, Facts Are Facts.
Yeah,
and
says the
one's
same thing.
anti-Semitic and one's official history. Of course, that official history does leave out why the British were incentivized to need Jewish financing because they were losing the war and there's an armistice offered by the Germans.
Not to mention that the Rothschilds closed down their German office before the World War I started, right? Like they moved out and then went back and scuttled
Seems
the place.
like they already
moved
picked
out
a
of.
side.
It was interesting. It was an interesting little piece of history. But I do have one other piece of history I wish to introduce into tonight's time capsule. This is thanks to Vivek Ramaswamy, that guy run for president. You remember a couple weeks ago, he had made that tweet and he said he was quoting Ben Gurion and he was defending Israel's ethnic cleansing. And then he was going on Jimmy's show and Kurt texted me and I sent this document, what leading Israelis have said about the Nakba. And then Jimmy read one of these Ben Gurion quotes where he was admitting up to it, right? This is a different document. And I want to thank Vivek because he really gave me the inspiration to start looking into some of these quotes because these were off my radar until now. So I'm going to see if I can get you zoomed in. Let's see how we can do it without cutting the page. I don't have to like move it around. Let me zoom back out. Let me see if I can get it full. Little, doing it live. All right. What did Ben Gurion say? Sponsored by Vivek. Quote, if I were an Arab leader, I would never sign an agreement with Israel. It is normal. We have taken their country. It is true that God promised it to us, but how could that interest them? Our God is not theirs. There has been anti-Semitism, the Nazis, Hitler, Auschwitz, but was it their fault? They see but one thing. We have come and stolen their country. Why would they accept that? David Ben Gurion, first Israeli prime minister, quoted in his books. Here's the page, and here's the next one. Quote, let us not ignore the truth among ourselves. Politically, we are the aggressors, and they defend themselves. The country is theirs because they inhabit it, whereas we want to come here and settle down, and in their view, we want to take away from them their country. Behind the terrorism by the Arabs is a movement which, though primitive, is not devoid of idealism and self-sacrifice. David Ben Gurion, quoted on pages 91, 92 of Chomsky's Fateful Triangle. Next quote. We must do everything to ensure that they, the Palestinians, never do return, end quote. Ben Gurion, in his diary, 1948. Next one, quote, we should prepare to go over to the offensive. Our aim is to smash Lebanon, Transjordan, and Syria. The weak point is Lebanon, for the Muslim regime is artificial and easy for us to undermine. We shall establish a Christian state there, and then we will smash the Arab Legion, eliminate Transjordan. Syria will fall to us. Then we bomb and move on and take Port Said, Alexandria, and Sinai. Ben Gurion, 1948, to the General Staff. Next quote. If I knew it was possible to save all the children in Germany by transporting them to England and only half to be saved by transporting them to the land of Israel, I should choose the latter. For before us lies not only the numbers of these children, but the historical reckoning of the people of Israel. So he's willing to sacrifice half the kids to get his country.
In order to justify. All right.
Pope Pio. But wait,
the ends justifies the means. Wow. He's a pragmatist.
Right. They're doing partition right now. U.S. told him not to do it. Netanyahu's doing it. Partition. Quote, after the formation of a large army in the wake of the establishment of the state, we will abolish partition and expand to the whole of Palestine. Ben Gurion, page 22, Birth of Israel, 1987. Quote, the acceptance of partition does not commit us to renounce Transjordan 1, does not demand from anyone to give up his vision. We shall accept a state in the boundaries fixed today, but the boundaries of the Zionist aspirations are the concerns of the Jewish people, and no external factor will be able to limit them. Page 53, The Birth of Israel, Ben Gurion quote. Now we've put here to the bottom, because I don't have time to read them all. Quote, we have never wanted to dispossess the Arabs, but Britain is giving them part of the country which had been promised to us. It is fair that the Arabs in our state to be transferred to an Arab portion. October 5th, 1937, Ben Gurion to his 16-year-old son Amos, quote, we must expel the Arabs and take their places. And if we have to use force, not to dispossess the Arabs of the Negev and Transjordan, but to guarantee our own right to settle in those places, then we have force at our disposal, end quote. Right? He has other interesting letters.
The
to his sons.
legalese involved,
Yeah,
or the rationalizations are absurd. Oh.
He wrote in his diary, quote, the compulsory transfer of the Arabs from the valleys of the projected Jewish state. We have to stick to this conclusion the same way we grabbed the Balfour Declaration. More than that, the same way we grabbed Zionism itself. All right? Now we got that on the record. Don't be feeling bad for Vivek. It was his mistake. He was just trying to be rah-rah team, and he doesn't know enough to read that stuff because he's been running biomedical companies and stuff, right? He's a smart guy. If he listened and looked, he would see what we've been pointing out on this show for the last 115 days.
And he wouldn't be attempting to run for president.
Not with, well, I mean, if you want to run on the ethnic cleansing genocide ticket, like they're writing those tickets, they'll fund you for
I'm
that.
just saying, like, the funding is so skewed that, the only one to even get the possibility representation to
But
be
the international banking family that controls central banking, Tony, doesn't have anything to do with the persecution of people who speak out against that banking by taking away their money and ability to transact in that banking. So I think Kanye proved all that. I think he proved it, yeah.
It's not like that precedent was set during COVID or anything and then just continued with any sort of cultural narratives various financial institutions find displeasing.
This next clip is a solutions-based episode from James Corbett of the Corbett Report. Let's take a look.
Welcome back, friends. Welcome back to the Solutions Watch podcast. I'm your host, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, coming to you in February of 2024 with yet another potential solution: niche casting. What is niche casting, you might ask? And that's a good question. Don't bother to look it up, because as far as I know, it is a neologism that I have just invented for something that I'm not sure it really exists yet, at least in the form that I wanted to, but let's work on that. All right, so in order to introduce this idea and its potential relevance to the Solutions Watch audience, let me first introduce to you how I came across this concept, this idea, specifically with regards to a trial that was going on in Washington, D.C. and that recently wrapped up. So here's a little test. Here's a headline. Let's just gauge your reaction to this headline. The headline is, Jury Awards Climate Scientist Michael Mann $1 million in Defamation Lawsuit. Does that headline mean anything to you? Well, if you're in the general public, probably not. Michael Mann, isn't he a Hollywood director, climate scientist? I don't know. Defamation lawsuit, $1 million? I don't know, whatever. Shrug. Well, hopefully you're not part of the general population. You're part of the Corbett Report listening audience. You're a solutions watcher. So you might have some idea of the context of this headline, and you might know something about climate scientist Michael Mann. Oh yeah, James has talked about him several times, and I remember that ClimateGate thing, and oh yeah, remembering Tim Ball, CorbettReport.com/Tim Ball. You'll remember in the end of that episode I was talking about the lawsuit that Michael Mann filed against Tim Ball in Canada that kept him occupied in the court system for years, costing him an inordinate amount of money in legal fees that Mann was ultimately obliged to actually pay for, but that those funds were not forthcoming, and Dr. Ball ended up dying in abject poverty as a result of that. You'll remember that. And you'll also remember that there was a concluding statement in that episode from Mark Stein, and Stein talking about his own trial. Oh, okay. Yeah, I know something about Michael Mann was suing Stein and maybe a co-defendant about defamation. Oh, and the jury has awarded him $1 million. So you may be somewhat familiar with this story, and you may at least know enough to know that this is a disappointing result. But then there's a third class of people in the audience, probably a much smaller group, the people who listened to the Climate Change on Trial podcast, and thus truly understand this headline in all of its depth. And if you are in that part of the audience, you are probably picking your jaw up off the floor right now, absolutely stunned and heartbroken to hear that verdict. As I was myself when I saw this headline, because I was a listener to the Climate Change on Trial podcast. What was the Climate Change on Trial podcast? Good question. So, back a couple of weeks ago, when this trial, this defamation trial that Michael Mann had filed against Mark Stein and his co-defendant 12 years ago, back in 2012. Well, after 12 years of the gears of injustice grinding on, as this trial finally was set to go there in Washington, D.C., I saw the headlines announcing this and the usual sort of environment and climate change blogs that I frequent. I saw people talking about it. I thought, this is going to be an interesting trial. I definitely want to feature this, cover it. I want to think about this. I want to know how the trial proceeds. So I was preparing to follow this trial in the way that I would normally follow a trial. Okay, I know this blog will be talking about it. I know this website will be talking about it. I'll follow their coverage. Maybe at the end of the week, they'll summarize what happened this week. And at the end of the trial, they'll report on the verdict and what it means. Okay, that's how I'll cover and keep track of this trial. But luckily, on the first day of the trial, in one of those blogs or one of those articles I was reading about it, I found a link to something called the Climate Change on Trial podcast, which purported to be a podcast that was going to cover this trial. Okay, oh, cool, a podcast. Well, I like listening to podcasts while I'm out driving around. It'll be an easier way to keep track of what's going on in this trial. All right, so I sign up, I download the first couple episodes, I start listening, and I was hooked. It is impossible for me to convey to you, if you were not along for the wild ride of the Climate Change on Trial podcast, just how valuable this podcast was, at least for me, as someone who was interested in this trial and I would have liked to have been in the courtroom, but hey, next best thing, here's a podcast devoted specifically to this trial. And that podcast and its entire archive is there, and it's set, and it's done. It was a podcast that was literally just for this trial. And every single day of the trial, the co-hosts of this podcast, who were attending the actual courtroom, who were there in court, were listening to the testimony, etc., would summarize what happened that day. And they even went to the extra added expense of hiring voice actors to actually act out parts of the transcript, in key parts of testimony, cross-examination, opening statements, etc. And that might sound like, okay, whatever. Not much of anything. But it's hard for me to convey this to you, but I cannot express how incredibly valuable that was for me in wanting to keep track of this trial. And it's one of those things where it's like saying, hey, you should watch Hoop Dreams. What's Hoop Dreams? It's a documentary about some high school / college basketball players. Like, I don't even like basketball. Who cares? No, you don't get it. This documentary is so good, it does not matter if you like basketball. It's an incredible documentary. Well, that's the way I feel about this podcast. The Climate Change on Trial podcast, yeah, okay, whether or not you know or care anything about Michael Mann or climate science or the hockey stick or any of this stuff, listen to the podcast. It's actually truly fascinating. The back and forth, the testimony, what was revealed during this trial, the incredible twists and turns, and then this verdict is absolutely just jaw-dropping to anyone who was following the trial, because how could the jury have read this trial in that way? It's absolutely incredible. Anyway, today's podcast is not about the trial. Hopefully I will be able to talk more about the trial in the future and follow up on this, but that's not the purpose of today. Today, I want to concentrate on that idea. Here was a podcast that ran for a couple of weeks that very closely and very intensely followed one very, very, very niche topic and followed it very well in a way that I feel sated. As information junkie as I am, I feel like I know a lot about this trial and have a good handle on it as a result of this. Wow, that was incredibly useful. I wonder if there's another way that this concept could be used in the future. And that's how I came up with the term niche casting, because I think it does help to differentiate when I think podcast, I think some ongoing series like the Corbett Report, like Solutions Watch. There's no definite end date in mind. It covers very many different things on a wide spectrum and array. But this is a niche cast. It is a very, very, very specific podcast that is on a very specific focus that may be extremely time limited or limited in subject matter into a very, very niche area that is incredibly useful for people who are interested in that niche area. And I would argue for anyone, really. So how could people in the independent media or people who support and listen to the independent media, how could they make use of this idea to follow other things of interest? Because, again, you may or may not be interested in the Michael Mann defamation lawsuit. I argue you should be, because it's, at the very least, it says incredibly important things about the nature of freedom of speech in the United States and the ways interesting limits have just been placed on that. But what other ways could this be applied? Well, okay, here's another case in point. Here's another lengthy legalistic, not legal, but legalistic proceeding that took place that I think probably most people in the Corbett Report audience would be interested in, but probably not to the extent that they'd be able to actually follow every single thing that took place. I'm referring to the National Citizens Inquiry, which, again, you should be familiar with if you're a Solutions Watcher, because you will remember last year where I talked to Michelle Leduc-Catlin about the National Citizens Inquiry and what it is, and it's this commission of inquiry that was set up non-governmentally. It's a citizen-run inquiry that took place in Canada that was interviewing professionals and people from with credentials and what have you, but also just regular citizens who were impacted by the scamdemic in Canada, and featured, as again you will know from listening to that Solutions Watch, some really powerful, impactful testimony. And I myself, again, very interested in this, and if I could have been there for every single day of the inquiry and sitting there listening to every single testimony, I certainly would have. But realistically, that was not going to happen. And even though that all of these testimonies are available now on their Odyssey channel and various other places, you can go and watch them. But that's still a large investment of time sitting there in front of a device watching. It would be so much easier if someone made a niche cast out of it. A National Citizen Inquiry niche cast, just playing the testimony of all of the various people who testified at those proceedings. And then you could subscribe to that podcast and you could listen to every single one at your own leisure, or you could download the ones that you're interested in. Wouldn't that be a useful resource? Well, as it turns out, I'm not the only one who's had that idea. It turns out that a podcaster in Canada also, thankfully, had that idea even before it came to my mind. And I'm referring specifically to David Gardner of the Freedom Convo podcast, a relatively new podcast that has popped up, I believe, just last year in Canada. And the Freedom Convo, obviously playing on the Freedom Convoy, was set up specifically to talk about vaccine mandates and its effects on people in Canada. And more largely speaking about freedom in general and how those issues pertain in Canada and around the world. But the reason this podcast came to my attention, the host, David Gardner, invited me to be on his podcast. So I gave it a listen, and here's a new podcast from a new podcaster. I'm always looking to support new people who are coming up. Okay, I'll go on the podcast. And so I subscribed to his podcast, was listening to some episodes, and I found David was playing the testimony of various people from the National Citizens Inquiry, with the promise of going through and playing all of the testimony over the course of the podcast, or at least all of the testimony of the people that you haven't already heard. Because Peter McCullough and other people, you've already heard their testimony, no doubt. So he's playing the average citizens and how they were impacted. And that was, again, such a useful idea for me that I was very delighted to hear that was going on. Hey, niche casting. Taking a specific niche topic and putting it out there for those who are interested to use as a resource. What an incredibly powerful way of getting this information out to those who are desirous of it. So when I was on the Freedom Convo podcast, the link will be in the show notes to the full conversation, which I recommend that you check out if you are interested. But let's just listen to a portion of that interview where I derailed the conversation to ask David about his own podcast and that idea for playing the National Citizen Inquiry and the various testimonies as part of his podcast.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. And with the interest of time allotted here this evening, and we got maybe 10 10 minutes. I got a little 10-minute warning on the old Zoom there. I should really upgrade the Zoom if I'm going to conduct interviews on my podcast. And I certainly
It's your first one. Actually, can I derail? I want to ask you about your podcast because I'm fascinated about this and about the process of coming up in 2023, 2024 with a new podcast. I started in 2007, so it was a long time ago, a different space. But I've been listening to the Freedom Convo in preparation for this interview, and I was really tickled by the idea of taking and airing all of the National Citizens Inquiry. I thought that was a great idea, and I'm very excited about that because as people might know, I testified at the inquiry. I was following it and listening to various, but I didn't have time to sit there and listen to and watch a video of every single testimony. But the idea that someone was going to play that on a podcast, and so I could just download it and listen to it, as I'm driving around or whatever. That's a great idea. That's a really, really useful idea. So I'm wondering, are you continuing with that idea?
Yeah, I started the podcast just to rant and rave about the vaccine mandates and how it's destroying my family's life. But we've gotten on our feet. We've worked it out for now. And as I mentioned, the news is changing and we might get a lot of money. So, hey, there you go. Anyway, so regarding the podcast and the National Citizens Inquiry, after about 20 or 30 episodes, I was like, what am I going to do now? I've complained. I've done the complaining. Maybe that's it. Let's wrap it up. And I talked a lot to my wife and I thought a lot about this word freedom. And I thought, well, this is a freedom show about the philosophy of freedom. There's many facets of freedom. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I was watching all the NCIs at the time. And I said, why don't I just air them all? So, because that seems to me one of the most important things that any country has done. All of these testimonies compiled in your head, if you just listen to 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 of them, it's ordinary people and experts. But it's the ordinary people ones that I'm focusing on a bit. And people who come in through Zoom, sometimes, unfortunately, the audio is not great for my archaic system that I'm using, which is a microphone sitting on my laptop. And I'm hoping to improve my technological know-how. But anyway, so I tend to focus on some of the more down-to-earth, like the dentists who lost their job and the nurses who lost their job and all of these things. It's unbelievable what has happened. So I said, why don't I just air them so people don't have to sit down in front of their computer and watch all of these things. They can walk their dog or whatever. So I am doing that. So now it's a bit of a mixed show where I do things that I find interesting and have some fun. And then I play 1 or 2 or 3. Some are 15 minutes, some are 20 minutes, some are an hour. And yours was great. In preparation for this, I watched yours again. And wow, very voluminous, James, about the WHO and very interesting.
Once again, that was David Gardner of the Freedom Convo podcast. I hope you'll check it out. At the very least, you can listen to our conversation. I thought we got into some interesting areas. And if you're interested, you can explore the NCI testimony, NCI playbacks, etc. That are being put out there on the Freedom Convo podcast feed. For example, David recently posted up the NCI testimony of Chief Greg Burke from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. Worth listening to. A very interesting idea. Now, I will immediately amend myself to realize that after I had talked to David, I realized that the NCI, the National Citizens Inquiry, actually has its own niche cast. It did put out all of the testimony in podcast format, which is something I didn't realize until after I had heard David doing this, but I should have known that. At any rate, that doesn't invalidate my point. It actually underscores it, that providing this information in niche cast form is incredibly valuable and at the very least makes it more widely accessible to more people. People who might otherwise not have the time to sit down and watch a video in front of their screen may be able to listen while they're out and about and doing their daily activities. And I think that is an incredibly powerful and effective way. I will hear much more of the National Citizens Inquiry now that I know it is available in this easily downloadable, easily selectable audio format. I will be able to listen to much more of the National Citizens Inquiry than I hitherto had been able to. Yay! Win-win. Who could not win from this? So, we could continue on thinking of ways that this can help in the dissemination of information on niche topics or certain ideas. And certainly what we've heard today so far is definitely in that legal sphere where it is generally difficult to follow the ins and outs and day-to-day of a trial that is ongoing, that you can't be in the courtroom to hear all the testimony and counter-testimony and what have you. It's incredibly valuable to have reporters in that courtroom who could then summarize it and not just write up a little blurb that might get a few hundred words in a blog post at the end of the week. No, to be recording a podcast, interviewing people involved in the trial, having actors read transcripts from the courtroom, or having the actual courtroom testimony, if that's available, having that on tape. Incredibly effective way of doing that. So that is certainly one way that this idea could be pursued in the future. And something that I have in mind, a trial that people may or may not be aware is ongoing at the moment, the Fluoride trial that I know, for example, Derrick Broze at the Conscious Resistance is covering for The Last American Vagabond and the various outlets that he works for. He is covering that trial. Wow, a niche cast about the Fluoride trial would be extremely valuable for people like myself who are interested in covering the ins and outs and the daily reportings of that without having to read this article and this summary and that summary. It would be great to have it in an easily downloadable form. Or it doesn't just have to be obviously about a legal proceeding. It could be about any sort of extremely focused, narrow sort of event or ongoing topic that is very interesting to certain people. I could think of a million off the top of my head. I would love, for example, in the past, I had a biometric ID open source investigation of trying to catalog all of the various biometric ID programs that are going on in all of these different states, nation states all around the globe. And here's what's happening in Albania, Argentina, Brazil, whatever. And I was trying to cover that, and I did assemble a list that obviously was a thing of its time, and you can go back and look, and you can see this was the state of various programs that I was able to put together back at that particular snapshot in 2020 or whenever that was. But wouldn't it be great if there was an ongoing podcast that was specifically about just that topic? Here's the latest biometric ID program that's been rolled out in this particular corner of the globe, and this is the way that it operates, and this is the biometric details it's using, and this is the system that it's running on. And that's just one, again, extremely specific topic that would be coverable, bite-sizable, that people who are interested would be able to follow the information much more easily that way if it was in that very, very detailed, very compressed form. And on and on and on. Whatever topic you are interested in, I am sure you could think of a way that that could be converted into, again, a niche cast. This is the way that I'm thinking about it, precisely because of that Climate Change on Trial podcast. Put me in the mind of podcasting and how incredibly useful that was for me, given my daily routine. Again, of course, it doesn't have to be a podcast specifically. It could be a microblog or even a social media profile that's specifically talking only about this or that particular niche. Now, this already exists to a certain extent, obviously. I mean, I'm talking about things that already exist, and I'm sure you can think of examples of other things along these lines that exist. But I think it is helpful to have this as a concept, as a category, as a thing that we can name, and we can call it Nichecast or whatever you want to call it, that we can identify as a solution that we should be consciously directing efforts towards building up, because I think this is a truly effective way as the dinosaur media empires start to collapse and crumble around us, which we're talking about on New World Next Week just a week or two ago, and which is proceeding apace. Yay, great. But the daily coverage of this or that event that we have come to expect is going to start dissolving as the alternative media that's always chasing the MSM tail is suddenly not going to have any tail to chase. What are we going to talk about? Oh, how about whatever we want to talk about? And here's a specific thing that I can cover and that I'll just have a little niche cast about this particular thing, and someone will have something about that over here, and someone else can come and synthesize this and this and this piece of information and put it together in a different way. I think this is part of a new paradigm of exploration and following information that will be extremely useful. And again, one way, one handle that you can use to get an understanding of what that would look like, for me at any rate, was the Climate Change on Trial podcast. Oh, that's an incredibly effective way of getting information about this rather niche, rather arcane little thing that's happening in Washington, D.C. that 99.9% of the population doesn't even know about, probably doesn't care about, although they should. So, This is where my mind is running with this. And in the interest of following up from last week's episode, where I introduced the concept of pay it forward as a way of helping to do something and create something out of this Solutions Watch series, I want to pay forward today's episode. So if you got value out of this idea, if you appreciate this thought, I would like you to pay forward that gratitude. Don't pay it back to me. Pay it forward to a niche cast. As I say, probably most people have something in mind that functions something like what I'm talking about here. Just a very specific thing that provides very detailed information on a very specific idea or agenda or event or something that's happening that you are grateful for. Please pay forward your gratitude for this idea to them. If there is a niche cast out there that you support, please pay it forward. If you want more information on the pay it forward idea, please go back to last week's edition of Solutions Watch. And I'd like to just take a moment to pay back my gratitude to all of the people all the Corbett Report members who responded to that episode and responded so positively with specific ideas of various people and organizations who are worthy of your support and who you could be paying forward your gratitude to. For example, I note that Corbett Report member CQ opened the comments from last week by suggesting Ian Davis, previous Corbett Report guest, someone that I'm sure Corbett Report listeners will know, as a worthy recipient of Pay It Forward gratitude. Ian Davis has a note up on his page explaining that he really needs your help if he's going to continue to provide the research and analysis that he does on a full-time basis. So please consider becoming a paid subscriber of his Substack or going to his donor page. So CQ suggested that. I think that's a very worthy cause, and I hope people will support it. And I saw other Corbett Report members like, it's spelled Kumro, but I have it on good authority. It's pronounced Simro, chiming in to say that that's a great idea. We had VPass, Corbett Report member VPass, saying that Cal Washington at InPower is a good candidate for Pay It Forward gratitude. M-Key, Corbett Report member M-Key, was suggesting that this particular Mark Stein $1 million punitive damage case is a good way of paying forward attention, and so that the valuable work that the Climate Change on Trial podcast did, for example, on this issue, does not go in vain, and people can at least know the details of this horrible travesty of justice that hopefully will be overturned on appeal. Again, very many different ideas. Taurus came with a list of 10 different independent media outlets that people might want to consider supporting with Pay It Forward gratitude. So great. I hope the Pay It Forward idea does start to mushroom and balloon from here, and I hope some of the recipients of this Pay It Forward gratitude will themselves pay it forward to other worthy causes, and hopefully we can start to generate some energy behind this. So if you want to pay forward your gratitude for this podcast, please consider supporting some niche caster out there. For example, if you, like myself, if you found the Climate Change on Trial podcast valuable, just chip in a few bucks to the Climate Change on Trial podcast, or whatever the case may be. Maybe it's Freedom Convo. It's a new podcast, a new podcaster. Show him support, show him love, give him an email saying thank you for doing what you do, and pay forward your gratitude that way. Or perhaps there's someone else, maybe like a Derrick Broze covering the fluoride trial. Pay forward your gratitude. Say, hey, man, thank you for covering this trial. And if you can put forward a niche cast on this, that would be great. Or donating to the Last American Vagabond, Ryan Christian, who helps support reporters like Derrick Broze and who could maybe put together some sort of niche cast on this. Whatever the case may be, support a niche caster as Pay It Forward for this episode. I really think this is one of those seemingly simple but extremely powerful ideas where we could actually use and leverage some of this technology at our disposal to disseminate information in a way more powerful than what we have done up to this point. I hope my point is not lost for today. But anyway, please, I'm very interested in your feedback on this. As always, Corbett Report members, please do log into CorbettReport.com. Leave your feedback on this episode, both in terms of niche casting and ways that it could be used, but also niche casts that already exist in the world that you would like to see people support. I'm always interested in that feedback as well. That being said, that's going to do it for this edition of Solutions Watch. I am James Corbett of CorbettReport.com. Looking forward to talking to you again in the near future.
Now, we have a clip from the Indie News Network with an update on Gaza.
Who are these people? last story, and probably more important than Marianne dropping out.
Far more important.
Way more important is Gaza. Well, we talked about Gaza ad nauseum, and I honestly feel in a way terrible. I'm just over it in terms of how saturated like this issue has become, but more importantly, just over like the effects that nobody is necessarily talking about, just the day-to-day of Ghazians of what they have to go through. Like, it's fine to talk about it in terms of, you know, the bombing and all that kind of stuff or whatever, or displacement, whatever, but people are not necessarily thinking about like the effects from that. Like, what is the day-to-day life for Ghazians on the ground and what they have to deal with? I don't think it's talked about enough. We just talk about it like more as a theory, you know, like, oh, we have to give them aid, you know, and all that kind of stuff. But thinking about it and more in theory is not helping them right now. And to the point, last week we talked about how women, you know, like have to use pieces of tents in order as women bodily products in order to take care of themselves. This story, like we're going to talk about tonight, they have no food. Well, not to say they have no food, that they don't have enough food is probably more accurate. So just to give some context, let's watch this clip from Al Jazeera that kind of goes into a little bit more, and then we'll unpack it after that.
Desperation is growing by the day, with hunger becoming unbearable for many across Gaza. Thousands of Palestinians surround a truck delivering aid in Gaza City, but there's not enough for everyone. Famine is now a reality for many, and health workers warn it's one that will likely get worse.
The situation is tragic. The word famine doesn't do justice. The word misery isn't enough. People are eating fodder. They're eating animals. Our water, electricity and internet has been cut. Food and flour is limited. Surviving is just so challenging.
Many displaced families who have lost everything over the last 3 months have to wait for days for a single sack of flour.
We don't have jobs and we don't have money. The price of a sack of flour used to be $10. Now it's sold for $200. We came here to face death just for the sake of having one bag of flour.
Some people have been killed while waiting for aid. The Gaza Health Ministry says Israeli forces recently killed at least 20 Palestinians who were lined up and waiting for food deliveries. A sense of despair is spreading.
We are starving. We have to eat animal food. We don't care about death anymore. They can kill me. I just want to have a bag of flour to give my family.
With little to no chance of getting flour, some people are using animal fodder to make their bread. That's until it also runs out. Palestinian workers say their options are vanishing.
If you go out to get flour, you will die. And if you stay at home, you will also die from hunger. We started eating rice and lentils, and now the rice has run out.
UN officials say a quarter of Gaza's population of 2.3 million men, women, and children is facing starvation. And as the war continues, more Palestinians are likely to face a similar fate. Katia Lopez-Odoyan, Al Jazeera.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.
Definitely do. Subscribe to Al Jazeera. They do okay sometimes.
Yeah. So let's unpack this a little bit more. So more on Al Jazeera. This is written by Mohammed Lawashish. I guess that's how you Mahawish, I guess.
Mahawish.
Where he reports, this is him. This is an essay he wrote. We are being starved, dispatched from Gaza City as Israeli assault continues. I don't write to engender sorrow. Had sorrow moved people, we wouldn't be where we are now, writes Mohammed Malawish from Gaza City. So he continues. For us in Gaza City, enduring the daily struggles like staying safe, fighting hunger, and protecting ourselves against the biting cold is a war in of itself, as Israel's assault on Gaza grinds on for the past 120 days. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost their homes at a time when that was all they had. Then after that came the loss of a simple place to shelter, as Israel bombed them all: hospitals, schools, clinics, and any open space where civilians gathered. The entire population of Gaza has been displaced. The entire population. After our house was bombed, I was no longer just a witness to the thousands of people fleeing their homes to find safety wherever they could. We went to the United Nations shelter in the north of Gaza. My family and I gathered whatever would help us survive and becoming displaced like our country people. There are about 600,000 people in North Gaza grappling with loss amid deprivation, starvation, and disease because they do not want to leave their land. It breaks my heart, but I have to admit we've lost the sense of what home means.
Mm-hmm.
Just finding the bare minimum space and shelter from the elements we need to rest has become a journey of heartache and pain, our misery daily routine of looking around to see where we can possibly sleep. My family, father, mother, sister, wife, and 2-year-old son, and I are seeking relative refuge in the parking garage of a destroyed apartment building. We dread looking at the weather in these winter conditions. All day we're trying to find the forecast, breathless, worried that rain would be expected that night. On rainy nights, I take off my coat and wrap it around my baby, making it both a blanket and protection for him against the cold, with hope and prayer that it will be enough for his small body. Beyond shelter is the struggle for food. I cannot recall the last proper meal my son had. Wheat is nowhere to be found, so we have been using animal field grade barley and corn to grind our flour for bread. Even these alternatives are scarce, but they are only means to get through the day. It's not like there is the space and security to grow your own food either, with the bombs and intentional choking off our supplies, even water. The aid entering this besieged enclave is very limited and cannot cover our daily basic needs. So we have had to try to survive for these past 4 months with no incomes or livelihoods as the prices of essentials skyrocket, if you can find them at all. Palestinians received food rations at a donation point at a camp for displaced people in Rafah in the southern Gaza Strip on February 2nd, 2004. The situation in the north is much more dire. As a result, starvation is beyond widespread in the north of Gaza. Babies, children, adults, and the elderly are all suffering from the lack of food. An ounce of coffee used to be 10 shekels, around $2.75, and now it costs 120 shekels, $33. A liter of drinking water that costs a shekel, less than 30 cents, is now 15 shekels, $4. If you secure food, you still have to cook it, and with no cooking gas, people are combing the ruins to find anything they can burn for a cooking fire, exposing themselves to bombing at any time.
Mm-hmm.
And so when every hour of the day is spent either looking for food or a means to make it, we cannot always worry about staying safe. Medical service in North Gaza have been nearly inoperable since the beginning of the ground invasion, and now there's little more than first aid services for the injured or those in need of intensive medical care. Israel has arrested and killed hundreds of medical personnel, bombed hundreds of medical facilities of various sizes out of service, or depleted their capacity with cuts of fuel and water. For the little that remains functional, how would the wounded get there when at least 122 ambulances have been targeted and bombed? Then comes the danger of the streets: airstrikes, soldiers kidnapping Palestinians or shooting them dead, and the mountains of rubble across Gaza. Even basic medications like antibiotics and painkillers have been scarce for the thousands suffering injuries from Israeli attacks, and so they get infections and respiratory diseases. People need to understand that the number of Palestinians killed in this aggression is much higher than what is being reported. Palestinians die from kidney failure, from cancer, from disease, from a lack of prenatal care. All of these are not recorded. People could have been people could have helped. People could have been helped had there been enough equipment and medicine. People can be saved, but there seems to be little intent to save them. I report from my phone when I manage battery and access to the internet or phone service, an endeavor more difficult than ever in North Gaza. Banks, post offices, transportation, and telecommunications all do not work. The list is endless. How can I capture or explain to the world, the ones that even read our words, that what is being endured is not only painful, but avoidable? All calls for support are not for abstract words of diplomatic solidarity, but for urgent action that helps us feel human in the eyes of the world. With every passing hour, fewer and fewer Palestinians in Gaza can appeal to the world. Every day brings more death, and the rest of us remain trying to fight off death. Even basic medications like antibiotics and painkillers have been scarce for the thousands suffering injuries from Israeli attacks, he writes. I do not write of the struggle we are living to engender sorrow. Had sorrow moved people, we wouldn't be where we are now. I'll outline our struggle because, at this point, we have either already been killed or are in the process of being killed slowly. We are appealing to the healthy ones, the ones with a bed to rest sleep on, the ones whose voices can be heard outside the slaughterhouse. I write to equip you with the knowledge of what humanity is undergoing. We, the Palestinians of Gaza, are being starved, are sleeping on the streets with no cover from airstrikes. We are being denied our humanity by an army that continues to inflict some of the most painful and inhumane practices of war we know in our modern day. It's time for the world to defy the abuses, to give regard to human life, to keep it simple and basic, like the needs we require to maintain breath.
Yep.
Hate reading that, but
Ooh.
you know, as he said, and as I said, like, I think the problem that we have with our politicians in the US especially is that they talk about the idea of giving aid, you know, but not actually doing the things to ensure that some of the basic needs in Gaza is being met. Like, yeah, food might be getting there. The question is how much, if anything at all. And then, like, there's nowhere to cook it. And then if you have the money, it's super expensive due to inflation. So as he said, it's like, we're still dying. It's just a matter of dying slowly, which is exactly what the Israeli proclamation wants to happen. So, you know, so it's the idea, yeah, you can give food, but is it going to be enough? And then how you're going to sustain yourself with infrastructure that's totally decimated.
Well,
It's what
meanwhile,
people are not necessarily.
they're blocking aid. They're attacking people in trucks bringing aid. They're attacking people on boats bringing aid. Like, you know, and they tried to stop UNRWA from being an aid organization there as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's just par for the course over there. So,
right.
I hope we still have some journalists left when this is all over there. That would be nice.
Right.
So, but
we do have a friend to the show. I'm not going to say who, for their safety. But they are planning to go.
Head over there. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
so, or at least when I talk to them, they have plans to. So we'll keep you updated to see if they do actually end up over there, and hopefully, if they're willing, being able to interview them to see, you know, tell us about the reality of what it is, you know, in Gaza. Because we're not, I mean, it's great that we hear what's happening on the ground, but it's too far few. And then, like, often it's not being reported on. So,
yeah,
just having more, you know, just having more people being able to share what's happening down than just the reality of what we kind of like in this story. I think just a way to kind of help humanize the situation in Gaza and in the West Bank, a lot more than what is being
in Syria and Lebanon, and
exactly. Yeah.
So let us know what you think. Leave a comment, like and subscribe, do all the things. Try to get us to 2K. We're getting there. That number's going up. So, but yeah.
Last, we have a compilation of clips from AM Wake Up in case you missed any earlier this week.
They're going, oh, this next strain of COVID could be, I think it was Lester, whatever his fucking name is on ABC, talking about some new fucking strain, and now there's Alaska pox. Some guy just died from Alaska pox. We gotta watch. You guys gotta watch out up there because there's a buffer zone between us and Alaska.
Yeah, that's true.
The Alaska pox, first person ever to get Alaska
pox. Now, look, man, I may not know everything, but I know the Alaska pox is syphilis. I know it is.
What's funny is Alaska pox. This is supposedly the first case. They named it Alaska pox, but COVID isn't named, the Wuhan.
The Wu flu.
The Wu flu. Like, what is happening?
We all know that.
We don't want to
Doesn't it mean crown? Doesn't COVID mean crown?
Yeah, corona.
Corona means crown.
Crown.
Yeah.
But it's the fact, like all disease and viruses or whatever are named basically after where they fucking come from, all except the Chinese one. It's just that's a weird,
Well, they always tell us, so they're telling us that no, that's not actually it. That's just like the red herring kind of like succubus thing that's been set up to lure us into it. And so yeah, the real deal is obviously the
real deal is it's a bioweapon, dude.
Like, there is right now though we've got the Fauci admitting
that is a good point.
Admitting myocarditis.
Again, we have experience with this type of vaccine in billions of people. It's a safe vaccine. Of course, with the mRNA, there's a very, very, very low risk, particularly in young men, of getting a myocarditis. But if you look at the risk of myocarditis from COVID itself is greater than the risk of the vaccine.
And we base that on the fact that if you reach down the back, your back there, and you climb all the way into your ass, you can pull out a very similar answer and then present what you just pulled entirely out of your ass to the public at large, who should swallow it like your Paxlovid or the Alaska pox pills, which are similar to Valtrex.
I bet I can go through my Fauci folder and find him saying how there's no connection to myocarditis. It's 95% effective. There's no connection to myocarditis. Now there is a slight, a minor,
minus.
That's how it starts. First,
it's not, if you will.
Insignificant. Kind of. Oh shit, we might have a little bit of a problem.
Hey, look, they're just soccer
blame
players,
it on Trump.
right? They're just soccer players and maybe DeMar Hamlin.
Yeah.
Oh,
have you guys heard of MPI at all? Mass psychogenic illness. We did a.
That's sarcasm, by the way. I love football. I just want to make that clear.
We kind of did a roundup a couple of weeks ago about this stuff, talking about this social contagion type stuff. In 2006, the DHS produced a report looking at whether the fear of a terrorist attack could trigger mass psychogenic illness. So, I mean, what we're talking about here has been studied by the DHS. And I mean, there was even this thread about the social contagions. There was a book called Psychological, or a paper called Psychological Medicine, in which he gave it the name bulimia nervosa. So there's a whole bunch of interesting, social contagion things, like, there's this thing that affected like 30 million people by the mid 90s, but like all these teenage girls, but nobody had heard about this stuff before all this happened. They talk about.
Or sorry,
what was that? Can I share an example of that, or
yeah?
Do I have?
Yeah.
It's like, because they tried it in Russia. They tried to incentivize women having babies. They basically just cashed out on the kid and then traded it in, and then it became an orphan. So
This is from our Canadian federal NDP and Liberals.
Do you view this as a parental rights issue at all?
Well, I'd like to say, first of all, there's no such thing as parental rights in Canada. There are parental responsibilities. And in Canadian family law, the primary responsibility of parents is to support and affirm their kids. Children have rights in Canada, and these kind of policies restrict the rights that children have in Canada.
Fucking crazy.
I mean,
it's the same in America. I mean, look at if you have your kid in public school and shit, like you can't just go there and get your kid out of school.
Well,
for example,
really?
Yeah, you can't just run up in there and just be like, yo, I want to take my kid. You got to have a fucking reason and a fucking. Not
I feel
always
like
a
Canada's
no, but
farther ahead on you guys than that.
yes, they are farther ahead on that. But
Isn't that what you're talking about? I mean, that's like
the way I understand all of this stuff is that it's literally whatever bureaucratic legalese will be used to take your kid if they want to, and they're just going to pretend that they're not doing that in the interim, but they are. So whatever it actually is and however it actually plays out aren't one and the same. I don't know. It's just a nightmare system that's been built up.
If you guys remember back a little while ago, we had an amazing conversation with Matt Campbell about trying to get or continuing to try to get some actual justice for his brother Jeff, who was one of the people who perished at the World Trade Center false flag 23 years ago. This has opened the door for the track trace biometric surveillance state that we live in. It was the justification for every illegal war that we've been in, and because he would actually like to see some resolution with this, because he's got a warrior's heart. Matt's still fighting. The UK did some dumb shit, as the UK does in court, which is kind of par for the course, but we're going to talk about that and a lot more back on the program. Matt Campbell, good to see you again, my friend. How you doing?
Yeah, not bad. Morning. Good to see you, chaps.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah. Matt, the UK court, based off of one of the most highly discredited and easily discreditable reports on the planet from NIST regarding, if I have this right, I might not have it totally right, but regarding the World Trade Center, denied was it a motion or an appeal that you guys were filing? Inquiry, that's what it was. Second inquiry into your brother's death, because the UK government should be concerned about the wanton murder of its citizens, no matter where it occurs. Do I have that about right?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't we're not in the court system yet. In the UK, we have an attorney general. I mean, for us, it's England and Wales. And basically, if you want to get an inquest reopened into my brother's death, because it wasn't investigated, and I don't think they looked at any of the evidence of, the likely reason why he died, which is because the buildings were blown up. There's a mechanism whereby you petition the Attorney General to try and get your inquest reopened. And they're an elected position, so it's from the current government, and yeah, for the second time they've refused us the ability to get my brother's inquest reopened. So I can't remember when I spoke to you guys last. It was probably August last year, and so if I just backtrack very quickly, so my brother had an inquest.
Certainly, yeah.
When remains are repatriated back to the UK when they've, something's happened abroad, usually in violent or, those kind of situations. It's a very straightforward kind of rubber stamp, in my opinion, of, cause of death. It was all over and done with. the actual inquest itself into 9 other British victims, was all done in about 100 minutes. My brother's death was dealt with in about 2 or 3 minutes. It really was that brief. And yeah, this was back in 2013. And I've been trying ever since to try and get his inquest opened and evidence that wasn't considered to be looked at, namely the use of incendiaries and explosives to break down the towers. Fast forward to the summer of 2021, and we petitioned the Attorney General with a 2,500 page application, loads of evidence, loads of eyewitness testimony, some first responders who were eyewitnesses to explosives and explosions going off, expert testing and the like. And then they sat on it. The Attorney General sat on it for nearly 2 years. In June last year, they came back with a decision saying, nope, we're not going to let you reopen your brother's inquest. Absolutely, I mean, irrational and more importantly, unlawful reasons. So when I spoke to you guys in August last year, we were in the middle of doing basically trying to raise funds so I could engage a barrister to do what's called a judicial review. You apply for judicial review, which is basically where you challenge authority on a decision that they've made because it's unlawful or irrational. So we threatened in September. I mean, oddly enough, we submitted a letter to the Attorney General on the 11th September last year. And it was very clear that they had basically erred in their application of the law to the test they're supposed to apply. And they actually withdrew, which I think is the first time ever, they withdrew their decision that they'd made in June, which was to deny us. And okay, they say to us, we're going to make a fresh decision. So, you know, I'm still fairly optimistic at this point. You know, my mum thinks as well, we're gonna get my brother's inquest reopened. And then they sat on it, and okay, it wasn't 22 months this time, it was January this year, and they've come back with it's almost the same irrational, unlawful reasons again, with a little bit of extra madness that they've thrown in. And yeah, I mean, it's really frustrating because again, the only legal recourse we have is this bloody judicial review process, which is it's expensive. We have very little time to prepare for it. And, you know, I won't go into too much detail right now, but it's lawfare. It's what we do. They make it really hard. They try to exhaust you energy-wise, time-wise, money-wise. And I believe that's what's going on right now.
And of course, while that's happening, on Super Bowl Sundays, so interview dropped what, Thursday, Friday, something like that. Friday, maybe Thursday, whatever. That was let's see, Sunday was the 11th. Friday was the 9th. On the 8th, so Thursday, as the interview is dropping, Congress introduces a bill that has $95 billion in it in spending to go to Ukraine, to go to Israel, as Lindsey Graham calls it, Israel, and to Taiwan. So we can't forget Taiwan. Yeah, why would we not want to throw several billions of dollars worth of weapons and stuff like that at Taiwan? Is the litmus test? Describe the litmus test, because I think I agree, and I think I know where you're going with it. But describe what the litmus test is, please, John. Yeah, I don't even know where the fuck I was going with that. Oh, that's right. So they fucking during, like, while the Super Bowl, these motherfuckers rolled TVs in so they could sneak in almost $100 billion of spending, military spending, on Super Bowl Sunday while nobody was paying attention. That's your government. That's your government. That's great. That's great. Fantastic. and say, oh, well, you can tell he's mentally competent. Well, again, while the Super Bowl is going on, Congress is meeting to give Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan almost $100 billion. And Israel is bombing the fuck out of the only remaining crossing out of the entire territory at Rafah. So in case we haven't been talking about it over the last week or so, well, I don't know if it's subtitled or if he's in English or what the fuck ever, but if I type in Rafah, there should be a number of things that pop up. Was there an actual? There's just video of Rafah. That's fun. Let's see. Okay, well, here's at least like a little bit of a English language report. Wonder what it's gonna sound like. It's the BBC. Yeah, when you kill all of the journalists, it's hard to get a lot of actual on-the-ground reporting.
What are you hearing about the current situation in Rafah?
It's killing fields. It's horror. It's carnage. It's genocide in every sense. To push people all the way to the very south of Gaza, as you just said, half of the population of Gaza are in Rafah now. This is the city of my birth. Only last night, Israel has literally massacred from 60 to 100, and we don't know the exact number because still people are under rubble, including the family of my wife, her aunt, the husband, all the children, and all the grandchildren are gone. This is the plan from day one. The plan was depopulating Gaza. It's an ethnic cleansing plan, obvious. And after the ICJ ruling clear that the crime of genocide is plausible, now Israel is officially on trial. What is the conversation here? And why are we discussing what is happening? What is happening is very clear. What we need to discuss is the responsibilities of responsible actors like the UK and what should we do to stop the genocide that is happening.
Well, that's pretty large assumption there that the UK is going to be a responsible actor, buddy. The Israeli government first said, go to the north. That crossing is how we're going to forcibly relocate you. Then, of course, they bombed that crossing. And then Bibi came out and he said, go to Rafah, where we're going to forcibly remove, according to that gentleman, half of the remaining Palestinian population. So they go to Rafah. And he bombs the shit out of it. And he's like, oh, well, we told you that we were done clearing the north of Hamas, so you should have gone that way. These sick genocidal fucks are currently getting away with it. I don't know. Definitely don't want you. They definitely don't want you to remember that they wheeled in TVs on Sunday so that they could watch the Super Bowl while they met, while everybody else was distracted, so they could send nearly $100 billion to a handful of countries that we're, running money laundering and military equipment sales operations.
One of the worst massacres of this whole process since October 7th. That, while everyone's, which is always what happens, which is not by accident. Israel took advantage of the fact that most everybody was looking elsewhere and just annihilated a bunch of innocent people in Rafah.
And then the same week that there is this incredibly historic fluoride trial that Derrick's covering, there's, they drop the Tucker Putin thing, the Super Bowl week. Like, it really is only maybe 4 or 5 channels that are talking about the fluoride lawsuit at all. And that's huge. That's huge. It could result in the defluoridation of the U.S. water supply. That's pretty significant.
Well, it definitely is, but I would argue, and this is in no way meant to, I completely agree. I doubt any of these entities are going to cover this regardless. But what I'm about to say is that I think that there might be a benefit of the doubt in some cases for people that might actually want to cover it, that this has been an ongoing process, right? Like, if for those that have been like Michael, like Fan and that group, like that have been really talking about this for fucking 6 years, like it's hard to get excited about it because there's been a lot of moments where it's like, oh shit, this should be everything, and then nobody cares, And so like I get why people might be like, well, let's wait and see what actually culminates from this. I feel good about it. I really do. What Derrick's been showing. I mean, but it's hard to get excited with the way our judicial system works. Judge Chen does seem to have some level of interest in the truth in this, but he's made moments so far where I'm like, that doesn't give me a good feeling about what he might really want to do. Like one of the things that by not allowing them to get into the political side of it, like he's been really explicit about that. I don't want to hear about the political motivations. And one of the points about that is well, like, because he argues the idea of like, whether it can get in from other sources, and these things that I think are like obviously scientific are like cashed over to this political car. And so they don't talk about it, And so it's like, it just feels like it's kind of being set up to fail, but I think no matter how this goes, it's opened up a lot. Same with a lot of these conversations. It's opened the conversation up to people seeing this for the first time in their lives, like buying water filters. Like we just talked about them attacking the Berkey filter, and which is one of the most common for, it's easy. So it's everywhere, but I agree. It's an important story, man. I hope it explodes. I think Dell and like Redacted and different people have reached out to Derrick, so hopefully they're gonna cover it.
That's good. That's good. And I hope they do. I hope they do. I wasn't saying that in terms of people who have like historically been, pretty consistent on reporting this thing, because the people that I've talked to about it, when I say fluoride lawsuit, they look at me like I just said, look, that deer has a flamethrower. They're like, I don't.
Fluoride. It's like that. Like, do you see Michael Connett's interview with Derrick where he made that point? It's like it's a common understanding. Like legitimate scientists who might otherwise legitimately study fluoride are like, I'm just going to, kind of omit that. We'll just ignore that topic because they know it's bad for your career. What does that fucking show you? Like, it's very obvious. There's an obvious, dark cloud over this conversation. Something's being hidden from us. It's just, this is one of the most obvious conversations in all of this that we do. I mean, the report itself already proves it. They just don't. That's the one thing I want people to hear. If you haven't talked about this or you don't understand what's going on, your government is actively fighting in court of law to keep something that they know is dangerous in your water. Like that they know. They've seen the report. They know the report says it's bad. They don't want you to see the report. So they actively try to hold that while fighting to keep it in your water. It's just like it's a perfect microcosm. It's what your government is.
And this is only one aspect of that type of shit they do.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
yeah, everywhere, man, everywhere. And that's things like
because
dioxins and
look at
all the stuff we've talked about.
Look at the Merck trial, the whistleblower trial that's been going on since 2012, I believe, 2010 or 2012, and it's just got to like discovery, I think last year, and that's for the mumps part of the MMR vaccine failing and them phishing data. And whistleblowers came out and said, hey, they fished this data, said the mumps shit doesn't work. And then you've seen the failure of the mumps part of that MMR over the past 10 years. The SS McHenry or McHale, can't remember which one now, is a ship that was back in 2018-ish, I think. It was the one that was off the coast somewhere and got stuck out in sea because everybody started getting the mumps. And for the military, they're all fully vaccinated, and then they had to be out there for a couple months. I think it was like 6 months. I thought it was longer. I think it was longer, and the news reports are changed to say that they were only out there like 90 days because you have to go like 2 or 3 weeks after the last mumps case, and they would almost be clear, and then someone else would get it, and they'd keep having to fucking go out the next 3 weeks or whatever, and they kept having to do that till everybody ended up with it on that ship. It's just a clear case.
Yeah, and let's not forget Brandy Vaughn. right? The
Yeah.
earlier example of a whistleblower. Merck has a pretty murky past, which is very clear. And she and I still I've never personally decided whether I think that it was as provable as some have argued, but the evidence is pretty damning. The stuff that she was saying before she was killed or died, very suspicious, man. And I mean, everything she was like, especially now looking back, it's like it's pretty fucking obvious that these people take pretty dark and suspicious, very criminal activity. Corporations, it's funny how we can have an endless string of movies where corporations are like the villain that would do anything to kill anybody, and yet we're like immediately push back when that's possible in the world. We're like, well, that can't be true. They wouldn't just
part of
kill
that
somebody. It's like,
part
they
of that
do.
oversaturation is to get it into people's heads that, oh, that's just the movies, you're silly, what do you know?
Yep, they do it in TV. Like we made the point about the X-Files stuff and whatever else, laying out, things that are, shit we all should be criticizing, and they're like, oh, you heard that on that conspiracy show. It's like, well,
and then Tucker Carlson interviews Frank Underwood from House of Cards.
Yep. The Clinton,
that just kind of disappears.
Just like it was very clear that was based on some kind of not like it wasn't explicitly from history, but it was definitely based on the Clintons. I mean, it's very clear.
Yeah, no, nobody was even trying to hide that. Like Kevin Spacey was running around talking about his close personal friendship with Bill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's creepy.
Yeah, and then that was Christmas, and people are all like, "What the fuck is going on?" Tucker Carlson and Kevin Spacey, but not Kevin Spacey. It's actually the character that Kevin Spacey played. Then he tells you
Frank
nothing's
Underwood
real.
is just the character that Kevin Spacey played in Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil plus Bill Clinton.
Yeah, right, exactly. But he's done this a few times, right? I mean, this is kind of his shtick now because he knows that it's like a way. It's actually. I mean, as much as
it seems like people are okay with a murderer when you're a pretend television murderer with an affectatious Southern accent.
It's a smart move. Like what he's doing is because it's even people that have suspicions about Kevin Spacey, most everybody was entertained as hell by that show, because of the context. Mm-hmm. And so it's like you hate him, but you don't. You like the character, and so it's like when he plays that, it's almost like he's taunting you in a way that works for him. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's it's smart, but it's creepy. It's weird. Because
the Tucker part
accused of being a fucking, I mean, let's not even say accused. He admitted to stuff with that younger kid, and there's weird stuff there. And then so he does this accent and the stuff, and it's I don't know. It's weird. But why would Tucker interview him?
Yes, and then you have Tucker who interviews a character. So this was scripted to do. And at the end of it, he even says, we love it when we blur the lines between reality and, fake shit, basically. I don't know the exact quote. But then people were kind of going what the fuck? Even people following Tucker that are into Tucker were like, wait, what the hell is going on here? Why the fuck do you have Kevin Spacey on?
What's the point?
For a week. And then Tucker's back into being a hero because he went over and he interviewed
got trolled by Vladimir Putin for 2 hours.
A CIA guy interviewed a KGB guy with each other for 2 hours, and
Ryan, how come people who should know better can't recognize a counter narrative or the other side of the coin?
Well, people don't. I mean, it's the two-party illusion. I think a lot of people do and can and are. I think that's what this is all really aggressive, desperately about. But there's a lot of people that still, look, the group I worry about the most are the people that don't give a shit if it's true or not. They hear that's not. They listen to this. They're like, it's about an enjoyment of the game of news that this has become. They've chosen their side, their hero, and it's that it's defending your sports team, like we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't really make it in the end zone, but you fucking don't care because you want them to rule in your favor. That's the mindset of this. A lot of this, and some of them don't identify it as that. I would argue, just my opinion, but that they just don't give a shit, man, and that Tucker is their hero that they're going to side with, and that he did good no matter what he does. And like he said, they'll question that's weird, Kevin Spacey, but it's like what happened with Trump is that he would do things, and I dealt with this in even my family, that were obviously self-evidently contrary to what he said he would do. And they go, well, he must have a reason. Oh, okay then. Well, I guess I can't fucking argue anything ever with you if your argument is, well, there must be some fantasy, some nebulous thing in the world that explains this that I don't have in front of me, but you're wrong still.
My
it's like, what the fuck? How do you
my
argue?
favorite with those guys was, well, obviously, if he tries to do everything he wants, the deep state is just going to take out his blah, 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 blah.
Gotta throw him a bone and play the game for a minute.
When he was
do you
over
know
there
what you just said? You know?
when he was in Moscow, and then they're talking about putting sanctions on him, and there was talks of like almost trapping him in Russia, like Snowden, but he wasn't even coming back to America. He was
We're
heading
back
to
to Tucker.
Dubai. He was heading back to Dubai, or heading over to
Straight to the
Dubai.
World Government
Yeah,
Summit.
right to the World Government Summit to do another 2 hours
On storytelling.
talking about Putin and how awesome Moscow is.
Yeah, I take the larger, like, aside from trying to get deeper into like what the objective was and whether it's all planned, it's like, which we should ask. For me, it's just like what Steve was pointing out is like the way that the two party elements of this are engaging with it, which is so entertaining to watch. Where it's like the thing we should remember today. It's not this old concept that I can't believe still exists for some people in the paradigm that if they want it censored, therefore it's the truth, or these like binary basic level stuff where it's like they can't piece together that maybe they'll censor it and see if you might then take that bait. It's like, think about it this way. Of course that does happen to a degree, but whatever elements we're talking about, the narrative managers, whatever we think is influencing this, if they don't want you to look at something, they don't talk about it. They don't say, don't look at this. It's obscured. It's censored. It's suppressed. It's the point where nobody even knows that exists or who was involved with it. Like, that would be the best effort. If they want you to watch something, they go, don't look at this. It's as simple as that today. And fucking everybody, like, you know why that got so many views? It's Putin, right? So it's a world leader. So that's going to have relevance. I still recommend people watch it because there was things Putin said I thought were relevant, but it got 100 and 200 million views because even people that fucking hate both of them, Tucker or whatever, wanted to see it because they want to see the outcome of what everybody was talking about. So it's this manufactured element. Do you really think they don't know that? Like, it's just so simple.
Look at Krasenik. Is that his name? One of the twin dudes.
Krasenstein.
Oh, right. Krasenstein. He posted Biden made that tweet maybe during the Super Bowl of him with the fucking laser eyes.
Yeah, as fucking Rafah's getting fucking just brutalized, Biden puts out the laser eyes tweet.
Well, Krasenstein or whatever the fuck, he posts, look at Tucker got 200 million views in how many days? And within 20 hours, Biden with his laser eyes has 189 million views. And it's like, yeah, for one, it's not a 2-hour fucking interview. Biden can't do a 2-hour interview, right? He can't do 90 minutes without 4 Biden flubs, at least 4 Biden flubs, right? Nobody's going to fucking watch it. The only reason people are going to this is to look and see, holy shit, he really did post this.
It's not the first time either. They've used that many times.
That's why people are going to look at it, and it's got so many views. It's because people are going to it going, wow, he really did post this. This wasn't just like a crazy screenshot made up,
And to your point, Chris, it's also a fucking meme. You can skim by it. Takes half a second, and you got a view, right? Like 2-hour interviews. Like, I don't know how that works on X, but usually there's some kind of a metric where you have to watch for at least a period of time before it counts as a view. So it's obviously not comparable. For the first time, I heard that guy speak on a Spaces. I'm not trying, go ahead and call me racist or insulting, but the guy has a fucking pretty dumb sounding voice. I thought it was hilarious.
I couldn't tell the difference between the two bros.
He sounded exactly like you would assume Brian Krasenstein sounds like. Perfectly.
It's just funny.
Our guest is in, so we should go ahead and bring Mark up. He is the editor of Bitcoin Magazine, and the reason that I'm familiar with him is because he's co-written some pieces with my good buddy Whitney, of which are excellent, by the way. We're going to talk about some of that and a lot more. Mark Goodwin, welcome to the show.
Hey, Steve. Thanks so much for having me. Hey, Chris. How we doing?
Good, man. Good, man. How about you?
Yeah, good. Crazy week. Just, very busy over here, writing a lot. And yeah, can't complain too much. Got some Assange news, and, there's just a whole bunch of shit happening in the space. So yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Well, if people aren't familiar with you or the approach that you're taking to, the cryptocurrency space, and the way that various different public-private partnership schemes are seeking to, throw a monkey wrench into that, let people know what's going on, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a good primer. Yeah, basically, I think there's a lot of there's a big financial incentive in the Bitcoin and crypto space to sort of ignore the old guard and legacy institutions kind of coming into the space and because this sort of number go up thing, and people sort of just are like, oh, great, BlackRock is now doing a Bitcoin ETF. This is great. My bags are going up. This is great. It's like, no, these guys are fucking financial terrorists, and they're, some of the worst people ever around that have just, really been a huge part of this debt serfdom. And now they're making big plays into this space that I think, was certainly, you could argue where it came from, but the ethos of the early community is sort of this like freedom tech and sort of this way to mitigate the power of the private sector from wreaking havoc all over, the world, really, with the dollar system, imperialism, and the control system of the treasury system. And, these people are now showing up in the Bitcoin space and really adjacently in the Bitcoin space, I would say, with stable coins and maybe a little bit into Ethereum and some of these other protocols. And they're really becoming mechanisms and rails to dollarize the world. And they're being marketed as this like, we're banking the unbanked and we're helping the global south and giving them access to bank accounts. And it's like, no, you're charging them a fee to use your bank account and you can rug them at any point. And the people that are running these bank accounts are like JP Morgan and BlackRock and BNY Mellon and some of these just huge institutions that have, been literally caught. Bank of America been literally caught doing some of the biggest spoofing, metal market manipulation, and also, their roles in like the 2008 crisis and cutting up all of these debt and mortgage obligations and selling them as tokens, basically. And they're getting ready to do this all over again. So, yeah, anyway, it's not always a super popular beat in the Bitcoin space, but I've been kind of pushing on this for a couple years now that, there's actually a great argument that Bitcoin is very helpful for the dollar system, and that it basically is this demand inelastic monetary policy that the dollar can basically inflate into, and can be really useful to sort of uphold dollar, hegemon, as we were now seeing with the ETFs and with a couple other treasuries, in terms of private businesses. I mean, there's like a humongous percentage of the liquid supply of Bitcoin within the borders of the United States, and within the regulatory arms of the government. And we've seen them
that's what's crazy is all of the Bitcoin held by the federal government in terms of civil asset forfeiture, number of different other methods that they've used to amass what is arguably one of the largest cryptocurrency portfolios in existence.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then if you look at, now, okay, who's holding these ETF holdings that have now, they're billions of dollars of inflows just in the last like 3 weeks. Like they all, I think 11 spot ETFs were approved on the 11th of January. And now, it's over 200,000 Bitcoin. Billions of dollars are now being held by some of the biggest players and asset managers, in the United States, and thus obviously the world. But yeah, good point, Steve, on the DOJ seizure. It's like, I mean, they have another 200,000 plus Bitcoins that were seized from, quote unquote hackers, or, these kind of
Silk
weird
Road.
stories. Silk Road, right?
Do you
That I heard is
remember?
the biggest wallet. The biggest Bitcoin wallet I heard is the Silk Road wallet, which the FBI has technically, even though it's anyways.
It's certainly a big one. I don't know if it's the biggest, but it's up there for sure. Yeah, and the way that the whole honeypot that they did there to arrest Ross in San Francisco, and and now we're seeing, again, I think my beat is a little bit on this private public, private capital creation merging into the public sector, and I've been sort of pushing back on this idea that CBDCs will ever actually be directly issued by the government, and actually they'll take the private capital model that they've done, since, the gold standard broke, basically, where they sell treasuries to private banks and then they make the dollars. That's going to be the same thing. We're going to see it with stable coins. And then as just to get at that, the DOJ seizing all these coins, like now we're seeing the FBI and the Secret Service being directly onboarded to Tether, which is the biggest stablecoin provider. They're just about at $100 billion worth of stablecoins. And they're directly onboarding, intelligence agencies, to like limit money laundering or criminality. And it's like, there's no better, mechanism for being a criminal and money laundering than the US dollar and cash. You know what I mean? It's not even close when you look at the volume of metrics here. So I think it's really interesting that we're getting this a lot of pushback from like a Trump about CBDCs, Vivek, Ron DeSantis, these people coming out and saying hoorah, no CBDCs, but it's like we got emails from Kushner in the White House talking about doing a USDC stable coin with a private, it's like there's, he got Brian Brooks in to be the OCC, the guy that made it legal for banks to hold crypto assets, while he's tweeting about how Bitcoin's bad. His actions are actually very pro Bitcoin. So I think we're going to see private capital come back in the form of highly regulated stable coins.
So what does that do in the mind of the liberation theology Bitcoin evangelical? Is there an actual sort of reckoning taking place in the community that there's manipulatable aspects to it? Or is that even, something or is that, did I just do a heresy?
No, well, you probably did for some people, but those people have, again, like kind of an economic incentive to just ignore the giant red, white, and blue elephant in the room, and it's like, hey, this is happening. There's an absolute narrative that the US can totally take advantage of this Bitcoin, because that's the thing that's so interesting about Bitcoin. It really is what it is. It is this, censorship resistant, the monetary policy can't be fucked with. Like, it really is all of these things. It is this digital money that creates kind of scarcity that's verifiable within a kind of an near infinite universe, right? It is that. But that also means that can be used by Jamie Dimon and Larry Fink and these monsters, right? So for as much as it is this empowerment tool, it's also a tool that can empower the enslavers, right? So we have to just be really careful about which way that we kind of go with Bitcoin. And I think that was the piece that you just had up there that I recently did with Whitney, was sort of about how, looking at what Larry Fink is saying, and he's specifically calling out Bitcoin as being an asset and not a currency, and how he sees tokenization of real world assets as being kind of the next step. He gleefully says, hey, we ETF to Bitcoin. What else can we ETF, right?
Exactly.
Turned it into a verb. Yeah.
Exactly. And yeah, we believe ETFs, or this is it. We believe, think again, we believe ETFs are a technology no different than Bitcoin was a technology for asset storage. So they're looking at, to me, it looks like they're taking the concept and then just sort of turning it into, well, we can manipulate whatever value is, because the whole of the entity is where the value is stored, not that it is a store of value.
Totally.
Like a
100%.
kind of an inversion thing.
Right. And the inversion is totally the right framework, because I think that this is sort of how, and again, it's a little bit of a generalization, but I think how kind of the powers that be or whatever, they like to invert things, and they like to take things that are usually a genuine human, uprising or revolution or movement or cultural moment, and they invert it. And we've just seen this, whether it's, taking the Dalai Lama and the CIA pays him $15,000 a month for like 30 years or whatever, turns him into a CIA asset, whether it's taking the legitimate, kind of human revolution that happened in the Bay Area in the late 60s, this like summer of love thing, and then turning it into this MK Ultra acid hellhole or whatever, which, again, I think these things really started from, real human movements that were then inverted and co-opted. And so you can argue where Bitcoin came from, if it was directly from, an intelligence operation, or it was cypherpunks, that ultimately, in a weird way, it kind of doesn't matter. It is what it is. The technology is apparent. You can run a node and look at it and see what the monetary policy is. You can validate your own transactions. And that's the beauty of it. So actually where it came from almost doesn't matter. What matters a lot more is where it's going. And so I think when you see these big guys that have trillions and trillions of dollars of assets under management that are known manipulators of paper markets in gold, right? Like gold, people talk about Bitcoin being better than gold because, there's no paper markets that can be manipulating the gold price like they have with gold for years and years and years. Well, now there are. Here we are. Larry Fink built them. We have the paper market. So we're in a new era kind of price discovery, or maybe a lack thereof, as the head guy is saying, I want to use Bitcoin as a universal ledger where everyone has an ID that connects to it. And we tokenize literally real world assets and carbon capture and all of this shit. And we shove it all onto this universal ledger. Bitcoin can as much be a panopticon as it can be a freedom tool.
Thanks for tuning into another episode of the Independent Review. Hope to see you all next week.
No one ever thinks they'll get sucked into a cult, but it can happen to anyone. Here are 5 red flag warning signs that you've fallen prey to a predatory cult. Cults use constant lies and propaganda, indoctrinating people into believing their cult is right and good. Members and outsiders alike are shunned for disagreeing with the cult's ideology or its leaders, who are believed to have superhuman qualities. They're discouraged from asking questions or thinking critically, and are unable to change their minds even when presented with clear evidence of corruption, incompetence, deceit, misconduct, and evil. Cults constantly engage in black and white thinking and fear of the outgroup. We're good, they're bad. We're enlightened, they're brainwashed. We're right, they're wrong. Only our group is moral. Collectivism is key. Cults exploit you financially, taking your money and providing little to no accountability as to how they spend it. They'll insist it's for the good of the group and shame you for not contributing. Cults emphasize special doctrines and set rigid rules and regulations that demand strict obedience. You're punished if you dare to disobey these rules or fail to comply exactly how they expect you to. You might even be punished even when you comply fully or haven't disobeyed at all. Authority is paramount across all variations and brands of cultism, and defying it is sin that warrants brutality. Cults demand intense loyalty to the group and its leaders, who are considered to know best what's right for everyone. Because of this, there's never a good reason to leave. If you do, it's because you're wrong, bad, crazy, and a threat to the security of the group. If this is you, don't panic. Simply stop making excuses for psychopathic authoritarians of all partisan persuasions who rule over a system that has trained you since birth to make moral exceptions for their depraved, violent, megalomaniacal monopoly over your freedom. Take responsibility for your life and claim your own self-worth so you aren't susceptible to the false promises of these manipulative power mongers who convince you your subservience to their power sets you free. The cult leaders and their enforcement henchmen can't control people if their followers stop believing in their propaganda, refuse to buy into their fake authority, and start believing in themselves. Sound like too much work? It's still not as hard as facing the ramifications of being a slave to a death cult that's rapidly destroying humanity.